Chapter 1, Avada Kedavra, July 29, 1990, London, Muller Orphanage. As you've heard, Mr. Avada, you are a wizard, the old man said. Now then, please tell me, are you willing to go to Hogwarts to learn magic and join the magical world? Avada Kedavra sat stiffly, a large envelope stamped with a prominent H surrounded by a lion, a snake, an eagle, and a badger, resting on the table before him. At the other end of the table was a white-haired elder with half-moon spectacles, a hooked nose, an astonishingly long white beard, and a kind, benevolent face. He smiled, his blue eyes fixed on the boy, waiting for an answer. Avada could not move. He felt overwhelmed. Albus Dumbledore in front of him seemed like a bright, sovereign star, dominating everything around him. Though Dumbledore's expression was gentle and his manner patient, Avada found himself breathless from the pressure. It wasn't that Dumbledore was actively pressing down on him. This was Avada's own peculiar talent at work, a magic sense. Avada had transmigrated. After his current body's brain finished developing and he could think clearly, he discovered an extra sense he hadn't had in his previous life. It wasn't one of the five senses. It was more like the spiritual sense from cultivation novels. Through it, the world appeared as countless lines and blocks of color. Every object had a corresponding structure. Even empty spaces had simpler, more regular, solid lines and color blocks. The one exception was the human body. Everyone was surrounded by two halos, one red and one gold, containing astonishingly complex structures. The centers of those halos were blank, as if there were no bones or organs. Gradually, Avada learned he could influence the golden halo around himself through thought, emotion, language, and physical control. He could extend it, make it fluctuate, and touch the structures of the world. After experimenting, he found and dismantled the structure that symbolized gravity with his golden glow and made a pen float. The method was crude, a few arm waves, and then unconsciously he mouthed Wingardium Leviosa. At that moment he realized where he had landed, the world of Harry Potter. As a longtime fan, he remembered the levitation charm perfectly, and those lines and color blocks had to be what wizards called magic. In his perception, the material world floated above magic like icebergs on an ocean. Magic and matter interacted and sometimes transformed into one another. The two halos, after long observation, also revealed their meaning. Red for vitality, gold for mental power. And then came the letter yesterday, and Dumbledore's visit just now. "Of course I'm willing," he said at last. Dumbledore's smile brightened, then grew serious. "Very good." He hesitated. "According to standard procedure, I should take you to Diagon Alley to collect the Muggle-born scholarship and to buy a wand and school supplies. However, your situation is somewhat special. I would like you to come with me somewhere else first." "Where?" Avada asked, curious and slightly anxious. Was his name the only odd thing about him? Would a name like Avada Kedavra get him into trouble? Azkaban, even? The Ministry of Magic. Before Avada could react, Dumbledore rose and opened the door. A young woman in a ministry uniform looked in and then crossed the threshold at the sight of the old man. "Professor Dumbledore?" she said politely. "We had a very pleasant talk, and Mr. Avada has agreed to attend Hogwarts," Dumbledore replied. "I think I'll take him on a quick tour of the school now, and perhaps pick up his supplies. No need to pack. We'll be back soon." "All right, Professor." The woman nodded, then smiled at Avada. "I wish you success with your studies, little Avada." "Thank you, Mrs. Green." Avada forced a smile, thanked her for the good wishes, and followed Dumbledore out of the orphanage and onto the street. They turned several corners until they reached a quiet alley. "The feeling of apparition might take some getting used to," Dumbledore murmured. He extended his arm. Fawkes. A burst of brilliant fire erupted beside Dumbledore, and a magnificent crimson bird coalesced from the flames. The phoenix, Fawkes. The beauty of the bird stunned Avada. The light around Fawkes was blinding, and the structures he perceived within it were far more complex than those of any human. Even a brief look made his head throb. "Take my arm," Dumbledore instructed. Avada gripped Dumbledore's arm, steadying himself for the leap. The world dissolved into crimson flame. When the fire faded, they stood in a vast, gleaming hall with dark wooden floors and a peacock blue ceiling inlaid with shifting golden symbols like a moving bulletin board. The walls were paneled in glossy wood, set with gilded fireplaces. In the center of the entrance hall was a fountain with a ring of gold statues, a tall wizard holding his wand aloft toward the sky, surrounded by a witch, a centaur, a goblin, and a house elf. "Welcome to the Ministry of Magic, Professor Dumbledore," a receptionist said at once upon seeing the flash of phoenix fire. "The unspeakables in the Department of Mysteries are already waiting for you. Please follow me." "So, Professor Dumbledore, what are we doing here?" Avada asked. "To deal with the matter of your name." Dumbledore's face had grown serious. "You must understand that your name carries an extremely evil connotation in the wizarding world. To use it as a given name is essentially to wear a curse. It will cause you all sorts of trouble." Avada's heart sank. "And according to my inquiry," Dumbledore continued, "your name appears in records connected to the Department of Mysteries, the very department that studies the unknown, things like time and destiny. I have come personally because I will not have one of my students treated as an experimental subject," Dumbledore said quietly. "There are some things I must clarify myself. That is why I came." Avada felt a cold jolt run through him. The Department of Mysteries, the most secretive, unsettling part of the wizarding world, had somehow touched his life. How could a Muggle-born orphan be connected to them? 2. Department of Mysteries compensation. After nearly 5 minutes of riding through a rabbit warren of elevators, Dumbledore and Avada stepped into a luxuriously appointed room. A thin man in black wizarding robes stood in the center. The moment he saw Dumbledore, he hurried forward, smiling broadly. "Welcome, Professor Dumbledore. I'm an unspeakable in the Department of Mysteries. Call me Crocker." "Hello, Mr. Crocker," Dumbledore said calmly. "I apologize for intruding on your work, but I have an important matter to confirm. In some of my investigations, I've found clear traces pointing to the Department of Mysteries." He patted Avada's shoulder and signaled him to step forward 2 paces. "Do you know this boy's name?" Crocker blinked, baffled. "His name is—" Dumbledore paused, then deliberately drew out each syllable. "Avada Kedavra." The moment the words left Dumbledore's mouth, Crocker visibly shuddered and his hand went for his wand before he caught himself. When he realized the situation wasn't what he'd feared, his face registered a mix of relief and something like embarrassment. "Avada Kedavra? An abandoned orphan? He actually has magical talent?" "Of all things," muttered Dumbledore. "Is it because of the name?" Crocker swallowed, then nodded. It's like this. The name comes from a research project we ran 11 years ago. At the time, You-Know-Who and his Death Eaters were growing bolder. As members of the Ministry, the Department of Mysteries was tasked with helping, supplying aurors and combat units with better equipment, and trying to decode You-Know-Who's methods. My team worked on a spell we came to call the Name Curse, a charm that, when a person's true name is spoken, reveals the speaker's location. "You deciphered that spell?" Dumbledore asked, intrigued. "Were you able to counter it?" Crocker's face fell. "No. The magic is extremely complex. We couldn't modify it, let alone neutralize it. But then we had another idea. Could the properties of this spell be used to detect unforgivable curses and other dark arts?" Avada's face twitched, as if he'd already guessed where this was going. "Because the trigger had to be a name," Crocker went on, stumbling over the explanation. "We found a newborn abandoned in the Muggle world, registered him in an orphanage, and gave him the name of the killing curse, Avada Kedavra. We then cast the name curse on the child. In theory, anyone who uttered the killing curse would be located as soon as they spoke the words." Dumbledore's eyebrows rose. "And did it work?" Crocker sighed. "No. The charm seems to have special properties that prevent it from being used as an ordinary name. If it had worked as we hoped, we would have used the same technique for every dark arts spell, and likely apprehended many dark wizards across Britain over the last decade. We didn't foresee the human cost. We never considered how a person could live with such a name. And we certainly never expected that a Muggle baby we randomly chose would turn out to possess magical ability. He could have lived a normal, safe life among Muggles." Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly and sighed. The matter was not one easily reduced to blame or intention. "Very well, let us ask the person concerned." He turned to Avada. "As you've just heard, your given name in the wizarding world is the incantation of an extremely evil spell. That may cause you endless trouble, ostracism from classmates, difficulty finding employment, even being shunned by parts of magical society. Changing your name won't help. A person's given name carries a particular magical significance and cannot be simply erased, and the Book of Admittance will record your true name. Dumbledore's gaze was steady. The Department of Mysteries is responsible for this, though not maliciously. If their project had worked, it would have been a tremendous contribution to the wizarding world. You may decide whether to forgive them, and you have the right to claim compensation. Avada felt awkwardness, not his stomach. He had been dumped into this world by fate, and now found himself at the center of an absurd, almost literary plotline. "All right," he said weakly. "I suppose I can understand that it wasn't entirely malicious. I can forgive. As for compensation, I don't understand wizarding economics. Professor, could you advise me?" "Thank you for your generosity, child," Crocker said, relief softening his features. He produced a worn folder and opened it. "We have a compensation plan." He read aloud. "First, a direct payment of 3,000 galleons, plus full reimbursement of necessary expenses during your schooling at Hogwarts, textbooks, robes, wands, cauldrons, and so forth. After you graduate, if you are unemployed, you will receive a monthly stipend of 20 galleons. If the ministry has vacancies, you will receive priority consideration and assessment. And if you wish to open your own shop, the ministry will offer a 5,000 galleon interest-free loan for up to 5 years. Avada looked to Dumbledore with a pleading expression. He had no idea how much a galleon could buy. Dumbledore listened, then gave a small nod. "It's a reasonable plan. You may accept it." Avada hesitated for only a moment before nodding. It still felt surreal. The first welcome he'd received in the wizarding world was a generous compensation package. "We'll submit this plan to the finance office," Crocker said, visibly relieved. With the department's recommendation and Professor Dumbledore's support, approval should take about an hour. Mr. Kedavra may go purchase a wand and return to sign the necessary magical contract. "Then we shall take our leave," Dumbledore said, inclining his head. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Crocker." Dumbledore summoned Fawkes with a soft gesture, and in a flare of phoenix fire, the two of them were back on a bustling wizarding street. Robed pedestrians glanced up at them with surprise as they appeared. Avada felt every pair of eyes on him. Dumbledore smiled reassuringly. "Next, we must choose a wand for you." Though Avada had already discovered he could perform some of his own spells without a wand, the idea of having his own wand quickened his pulse. Led by Dumbledore, he walked to a narrow shop whose worn gold sign still proclaimed in faded letters, "Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. 3. Reverse pick wand." Ollivander's wine shop was quiet and solemn. Narrow boxes were stacked on shelves that nearly reached the ceiling, and the pleasant smell of wood hung in the air. Sunlight slanted through the windows, catching the dust that drifted like tiny stars, and somewhere in the back, a faint chime sounded. "Good afternoon." A soft voice answered from the depths, and an old man stepped into the light. His eyes were a pale, moon-like silver. To Avada's magical senses, they registered as an intricate, almost alien pattern. The man hesitated when he saw Professor Dumbledore, then his face brightened. "Professor Dumbledore, what an honor! Have you brought the child to be fitted for a wand?" "Yes, Mr. Ollivander. Please help him choose one." Dumbledore smiled and stepped aside. Ollivander opened his mouth as if to say more, then, seeing Dumbledore's gesture, shook his head and turned to regard Avada. His silver eyes studied the boy for a long moment, making Avada a little uneasy. Finally, Ollivander's expression changed to something like comprehension. "What's your name, child?" Avada glanced at Dumbledore and received a small, encouraging nod. He said the name carefully, trying to soften it. "Avada Kedavra." Ollivander trembled for a heartbeat at the sound of it, then gave a slow, rueful nod. "Ah, I see. Which hand do you favor?" Ollivander asked. "Right. Raise your arm." A tape measure floated from the shelves, winding itself up and down Avada's arm and body as it took measurements. Meanwhile, Ollivander dove into his stock, fingers riffling through boxes as he spoke. "With a purchaser's name and measurements, I can narrow the range of suitable wands. Still, if someone is particular, we sometimes have to test a dozen or more. Try this, 10 3/4 inches, acacia, phoenix feather core. Give it a wave, try it out." Ollivander's words cut off as a red glow burst from the wand's tip. It wrapped the hand holding it and spread, enveloping Avada like warm light. Wow! Avada couldn't help the exclamation. The wand felt like a pair of glasses snapping into place. His magical senses sharpened as if someone had cleared the fog. His own golden radiance, his mental power, seemed to flow outward through the wand, somehow richer, more solid, reaching farther than before. It was, unmistakably, a magic casting instrument. Success on the first try. That's uncommon, Ollivander said with a mixture of surprise and delight. Then, recovering his composure, he smiled. Mr. Kedavra, congratulations. That wand suits you well. It will serve you on your path into the magical world. Avada had expected more fanfare after the frantic testing he'd seen other kids undergo. He hesitated. Could I try a few others? Ollivander chuckled and obliged. Very well. 12.5 inches, ebony, unicorn hair. See how it feels. Avada took the wand, and again the same red glow and warm current flowed through him, calming and clear. Huh. A new note of surprise crossed Ollivander's face. Very few can fit a second wand perfectly. Try another? Avada asked, curiosity plain on his face. Ollivander obliged again. 13 inches, cherry, unicorn hair. Avada grasped it. Red glow, warm current. It was the same each time. If 2 perfect matches could be a rare coincidence, 3 was already improbable. Ollivander's and Dumbledore's brows rose. Ollivander stopped bothering with the usual triple test ritual and simply handed wand after wand into Avada's hand. Each one lit up in that same welcoming red, filling him with the same ease and clarity. This can't be, Ollivander murmured finally. How is this possible? Any ideas, Professor? He asked Dumbledore, who looked puzzled in return. Avada, holding yet another wand and feeling slightly bemused, had the odd thought that he'd at least experienced the feeling of picking a wand, only in reverse. So, how should I choose my wand? He asked, careful now. Silence settled in the shop, thicker than the dust. After a long pause, Dumbledore said, rubbing his brow, why not simply take the first one? Ollivander looked reluctant, but ultimately said nothing. He accepted 7 galleons wordlessly and handed Avada the 10 3/4-inch acacia with the phoenix feather core. The simplicity of the transaction turned out to be convenient. With Dumbledore's expression as if pondering matters of great weight, no one in Diagon Alley bothered them, and Avada was able to finish his shopping for robes and textbooks with little fuss. They stopped at the ministry to sign the wand binding and compensation forms, completing the legal magic contract. Only then did Dumbledore fix Avada with a slow, serious look and speak. You possess a talent beyond what we imagined, Avada, he said. I hope you make good use of it. It wasn't the long speech Avada had feared, just those 2 sentences, and then Dumbledore's tone eased. Before you try to master it, do pick up a couple of Muggle textbooks on your way back. It will help when you answer questions from your friends. Also, one last caution. This next month is your final time to practice magic outside Hogwarts before the term starts. Use it, but be careful to conceal it. Issues around the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy are always troublesome. Thank you, Professor, Avada said, sincere. One more thought occurred to him. Professor Dumbledore, about my name. Dumbledore smiled. You needn't worry too much. The name on the school register and at the ministry can't be changed, but you may use a nickname among students. That way, only the head of the school knows your given name, and you avoid trouble with classmates. Avada Kedavra. How about Mr. K? Sounds good, Avada said, but inwardly he sighed. Taken from an orphanage, brought to Hogwarts by Dumbledore, startlingly talented, and named after one of the darkest curses in our language. Would that make him an object of fear or fascination? I hope I don't get sorted into Slytherin, he muttered. If the Sorting Hat ever heard his name, he wondered with a wry twist of imagination, would it scream and lob him straight into Azkaban? Chapter 4. Baron Shafiq. The next month was incredibly satisfying for Avada. With his wand in hand and Hogwarts textbooks to guide him, his understanding and control of magic shot forward like a rocket. The chaotic, blurry force that had once seemed indecipherable gradually snapped into focus as he studied and connected the dots. The entire world of magic had opened its doors. In truth, he had already picked up most first-year material in his previous years of fumbling experiments, some higher-year concepts as well. What he lacked was systematic organization and summary. and the Hogwarts books were exactly what he needed. He was already comfortable enough that he could cast a Protego. With a flick of his wand, a transparent, faintly blue barrier popped into existence. Normally, that was considered a fifth-year spell. Many incompetent adult wizards could not manage it. Avada, using memories from his previous life and his magical senses, had worked it out for himself. Almost every spell and transfiguration in the first-year book he could perform wandlessly and without speaking. With wand and words, they were even stronger. He still had weaknesses. Potions and herbology were slow-going. He lacked access to lab materials and living specimens, so much of it came down to memorization. And his memory, unlike those transmigrators blessed with photographic recall, was perfectly ordinary. He couldn't retain everything at a glance, but it was enough. Today is the day to officially head to Hogwarts, he thought, trying to tamp down his excitement. After saying goodbye to friends and teachers at the orphanage, he collected his belongings and took a cab to King's Cross Station. It was September 1990. He was a year older than Harry Potter. That gave him a smoother first year and, more importantly, time. 5 full years before Lord Voldemort's return. As someone who had lived the story once and knew its twists, 5 years felt like an eternity, a chance to prepare properly. The diadem and the vanishing cabinet in the room of requirement, the Chamber of Secrets entrance in the disused bathroom, the Gaunt House, Peter Pettigrew the rat, the locket under the carpet. If he played his cards right, he could stop Voldemort before he ever rose to power. He could prevent all those deaths, Lupin, Tonks, Snape, Dumbledore, Fred, and spare the magical world much of its suffering. Lost in thought, Avada found himself at the stretch of wall between platforms 9 and 10. He took out his Hogwarts Express ticket. According to Dumbledore's instructions, the ticket would authenticate him and let him pass through the barrier without Muggles noticing. A family of redheads stood gathered by the barrier, suitcases in hand, an owl in a cage. He recognized them by sight, the Weasleys. One of the older boys, George, he guessed, announced grandly, "Watch closely, Ron. I can only demonstrate this once." "It's all right, George. If you don't teach him, I can demonstrate again," replied the other twin. "You'll need this next year, so pay attention. Take out your ticket, hold your luggage, and then step with grace," the boy advised. He took exaggerated, flamenco-like steps and strode into the pillar, vanishing. "Did you see that?" one twin said, nudging a shorter redhead beside him. "If you're a bit nervous the first time, you can jog in, just like this." With a ridiculous series of paces, the second twin also dashed through the barrier with a piece of luggage. Avada watched, bemused. He had read the mechanics of the barrier, but he had never understood the dramatic jog. Why jog if you would simply go through? Was it a superstition? After the Weasleys had all disappeared, Avada stepped forward and cautiously poked the wall. There was no resistance. He took a breath and walked through. The scene changed in an instant. A vintage black and red steam train crawled along the tracks, belching white steam. Black-robed students clustered on the platform, some still in Muggle clothing, some holding pets or owls. The first few carriages were already crowded. Students leaned from windows to say goodbye. Others joked and shoved one another in their seats. Older students, starred by pent-up summer, waved wands and let off little tricks. A few unlucky ones bent their heads over parchments and scribbled. Avada slipped through and found an empty compartment near the rear. He set down his trunk, sat, and pulled out the potions textbook to continue studying. "Excuse me, do you mind if I sit here?" The door slid open. A handsome boy with light brown hair peered in. His voice was soft, reserved. "No, go ahead. Plenty of room." Avada gestured for him to enter. The newcomer glanced at the potion book in his hands. "Oh, am I interrupting? Sorry." "It's fine. There'll be time to study later," Avada said, smiling. He felt a small fondness for the boy. The boy stepped in and sat, offering his hand. "Baron Shafiq, pleasure to travel with you." "Likewise, Mr. Shafiq," Avada said, shaking his hand. "You can call me K for now." Baron knitted his brow. "K?" "It's a long story," Avada said with a wry shrug. "Professor Dumbledore advised me not to tell strangers my real name. As for what other students should call me, I haven't decided." Baron's eyes lit up. "Professor Dumbledore personally came to see you?" Avada shrugged. He was about to say something when Baron, half joking, leaned forward. Forgive my bluntness, but your name isn't Lord Voldemort, is it? Avada blinked. It wouldn't go that far. He hadn't finished denying when Baron sniffed. What did you just call him? You know who? The Dark Lord? No, he's the shame of Slytherin. Salazar Slytherin would turn in his grave. Shafiq? Avada repeated. You mean one of the sacred 28 families? Exactly, Baron said with obvious pride. But don't get the wrong idea. Just because we're pure blood doesn't mean we support that tomfoolery. Voldemort is a disgrace to Slytherin. Salazar founded the house to protect wizards from persecution, to teach them to live safely and well. He didn't mean for anyone to use cunning and ambition for cruelty. That so-called pure-blood supremacy, what a despicable notion. True pure-blood pride is about protecting our world, not ruling over others. Avada watched him, amused. From what he'd seen of Slytherin so far, there was a lot of attitude to sort through. Baron straightened then, with an almost formal air, added, If any of them treat you poorly, allow me to apologize on their behalf. He lowered his head in a small, polite bow. Avada was taken aback. Baron was defending house honor before he'd even been sorted. He reached instinctively to steady the boy's shoulder, but a clear voice at the doorway stopped him. Excuse me, is there any space here? Oh, what's going on? They both turned to see a pretty Asian girl at the threshold, peering in with a curious expression. Please, come in. There's still room here. Baron Shafiq glanced up without changing his expression and made a polite gesture. I am Baron Shafiq, and this is Kay. He prefers not to give his full name. It's a pleasure to be traveling with you. Cho Chang, nice to meet you both. The Asian girl smiled as she stepped into the compartment and hauled her trunk inside. What were you two just talking about? It sounded a bit tense. Baron Shafiq adopted a serious tone. We were discussing the state of Slytherin House. We agreed that some in Slytherin have forgotten the house's former standards and are simply indulging themselves, letting pleasure blind their judgment, He faltered for a moment, searching for a word for those disappointing upperclassmen. Bastards, he finished bluntly. Avada offered a grudging agreement from the side. Crude, but accurate. Shafiq frowned slightly but nodded. I was telling him that those actions are not Slytherin's true intent and asking him not to judge the whole house by a few. If any Slytherin offends him in the future, I will do my best to help and apologize on their behalf. The same goes for you, Cho, he added. Thank you for your kindness. Cho returned the smile, then hesitated. If you'll forgive my being forward, Slytherin's reputation is so problematic. Beyond what you mentioned, isn't it also a matter of who they admit? Ambition, a hunger for power, winning at all costs. That must make it harder to recruit decent people, right? You missed the most important point, valuing honor, Shafiq replied solemnly. A person's bottom line and conscience are what ultimately determine whether they become a good person. Ambition or a desire for power don't inherently make someone corrupt. I don't deny that those traits can make it easier for someone to cross that line. That's why many dark wizards have come from Slytherin. But that doesn't mean Salazar Slytherin intended that, nor does it mean there aren't upright, kind, trustworthy people in the house. I believe that, Cho said, and I hope that once I join Slytherin, I can help change some people's prejudice. Shafiq offered a soft reassurance, then shifted to lighter topics. Tell me, you're Asian, Cho? It's rare to see Asian faces in Britain, and even rarer among witches and wizards. Yes, Cho smiled. My mother is British Chinese, and she graduated from Hogwarts. According to her, she was the first Chinese witch recruited by Hogwarts in over 1,000 years, and I'm very likely the second. That raises an interesting question, Avada said. Asia is the world's most populous continent, yet it has relatively few witches and wizards. There's only one major magical school in all of Asia, Mahuta Koro, and despite recruiting from across the continent, it's the smallest of the 11 schools. I read about that in my family's library, Shafiq replied. The mainstream theory is that the birth of witches and wizards is linked to the Earth's magnetic field. The closer to the magnetic poles, the easier it is for magical births to occur. Europe and North America, being large population centers nearer the poles, naturally have more witches and wizards. Asia, despite its population, is further from those poles, so magic is rarer there. The southernmost parts of Africa and South America are closer to the South Magnetic Pole, and also have significant populations, so there are appreciable numbers of magical folk there as well. Given climate and resources, schools were established in places like Uganda and Brazil. Avada's eyebrows rose. It was a hypothesis he hadn't encountered in the books he'd skimmed. That sounds plausible, he said, but it's still only a summary of observed patterns without systematic proof. Shafiq sighed. Moreover, it doesn't explain the distribution of magical creatures. They appear on every continent in significant numbers, and that has puzzled magazoologists for years. I used to think about that when I was little, Cho said, her eyes brightening. I believe the heredity of magical creatures is more stable than that of witches and wizards. Once a magical species is established, or if a magical animal migrates to a new environment, it can continue to propagate and, over time, form a sizable population regardless of geography. One piece of evidence is that squibs never appear among magical creatures. That's an intriguing point. Shafiq looked impressed. Did you really come up with that yourself? Of course, Cho nodded proudly. Once I learn more, I want to refine the idea and write a paper for the Daily Prophet. Who knows, maybe a second-class Order of Merlin. You'll make a fine Ravenclaw, Shafiq said, smiling. Cho flushed with the compliment. Avada, a muggle-born whose knowledge of the wizarding world came mostly from the original books and the volumes he'd recently bought in Diagon Alley, listened with a bemused expression. He had assumed magic boiled down to a few flashy spells, Avada Kedavra and Expelliarmus, he joked inwardly, and was still trying to reconcile all the nuance he was hearing. Outside, the Hogwarts Express had started to move. Sunlight streamed through the compartment windows as forests and fields blurred past. Baron Shafiq produced a box of chocolate frogs and a handful of every flavor beans to share, then looked at Avada. You haven't really introduced yourself, have you? Avada thought for a moment. There wasn't much that would stand out. I'm Muggle-born. I grew up in an orphanage. When an owl dropped a Hogwarts letter on my table, I was, well, stunned. He'd noticed early on that other witches and wizards didn't seem to sense magic the way he did, so he kept his own sensitivities to himself. Sorry if that's boring. Shafiq waved it off and asked, What about your name? I heard Professor Dumbledore had to deal with it personally. Dumbledore, Cho echoed in surprise. She hadn't heard the earlier conversation. What do you mean? Avada didn't hesitate. When Dumbledore came to meet me, he showed me a few spells, explained the wizarding world, then took me to the ministry. He talked with them for a long time on my behalf and arranged some compensation for me. He even had a vault opened for me at Gringotts. Shafiq and Cho exchanged startled looks. A name that warranted Dumbledore's personal involvement and ministry negotiation, and compensation large enough to open a Gringotts vault. What could be the story behind that? Cho's brows knitted. There may be trouble hidden in that name. Dumbledore is one of the most respected wizards in the world. If he warned you not to disclose your name, it suggests a serious problem, maybe something even he can't fully resolve. Shafiq added, and try not to tell anyone about the compensation. Having a Gringotts vault means you already have more wealth than most wizards. You're Muggle-born and young. You could be an easy target for people with greedy eyes. Avada felt unexpectedly warmed by their concern and thanked them sincerely. Shafiq then observed, But you seem to know a lot about the wizarding world, Slytherin, and even the other schools. When we were talking earlier, I didn't realize you were Muggle-born. Reading, Avada replied with a wry smile. Besides the Hogwarts textbooks I bought, I picked up a lot of books about the wizarding world in Diagon Alley. I've spent the last month catching up. The sun slid toward evening, and the light outside took on a golden hue. The three of them talked and laughed through most of the journey until at last the train began to slow. A carriage announcer called through the compartments. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train. Someone will deliver it to your dormitory. The someone is the house elves, Shafiq explained as he straightened his robes. They run the kitchens at Hogwarts. If you're sorted into Hufflepuff, you'll see them a lot. When the train finally drew to a stop at the small, dark platform, a chill in the air made Avada shiver. Then a rough male voice called out into the night. First years over here. Note, Chinese migration to Britain was limited until the 19th century, with significant immigration occurring only after World War II. Given that small historical presence, the idea that Cho's mother could have been the first Chinese witch at Hogwarts is plausible. A large, intimidating wizard with a thick beard stepped out of the darkness, waving his arms and bellowing, "I am Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. I'm here to escort the first years. Are there any more first years? Is everyone here? Good. Mind your step and follow me." Hagrid shepherded dozens of nervous, curious first years along a rough, narrow path until the trail opened onto a wide lake. On the far shore rose a magnificent ancient castle, its towers vanishing into the clouds and its windows glittering in the night. The spires pierced the sky like carved stone sentries, lending the place an air of age and mystery. "That's Hogwarts," Hagrid called. "You cross by boat, no more than 4 to a boat." He led them down to the water and watched as the students climbed into the small vessels. Avada, Baron, and Cho Chang, already acquainted, took one boat together. "Everyone seated? Then, off we go." Hagrid took his own boat, and with a few gruff words and a shove of the oars, sent them gliding across the lake. No wind stirred, but the boats moved smoothly all the same. The first years fell into a hush, each face lit by the reflection of the castle, full of curiosity, nerves, and awe. The boat slid through an ivy curtain that hid a narrow entrance and into a dark tunnel. It opened into an underground landing and then led up over gravel and pebbles to a huge oak door. Hagrid knocked 3 times with his fist. The door opened just a crack to reveal a kind-faced witch in a patched, gray-brown robe. "The first years are here, Professor Sprout," Hagrid rumbled. "Thank you, Hagrid," Professor Sprout replied. She pushed the door wide and stood in the doorway, smiling down at the sea of young faces. "First years, welcome to Hogwarts. The start of term feast will begin soon, but before you're admitted, you must be sorted into one of the 4 houses: Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, or Slytherin. Your house will be your family here. You will attend classes with your housemates, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend your free hours in your common room. Good work will earn points for your house. Rule breaking will lose points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points wins the house cup. The sorting ceremony will be held before the entire school. Please keep quiet, tidy yourselves, and follow me." She led them through the door in single file and stopped in the entrance hall long enough for them to straighten robes and whisper to one another. "I once asked my mum how the sorting works," Cho murmured to Avada and Baron. "She just smiled and said I'd find out for myself, and never answered when I pressed her." "My parents were the same," Baron replied. "I asked the older wizards too, but they all clammed up. I think there's some sort of magic contract. No one can tell the details." "Is it dangerous?" a boy nearby asked. "Or illegal?" "Not likely," a girl said. "My father works in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He sat in the sorting when he was a student. If there was anything wrong, he would have looked into it. My parents told me that if you're really bad, you get sent straight to Azkaban." The conversation rose and fell until Professor Sprout clapped her hands. "Line up. Follow me into the Great Hall for the sorting. Also, you might see some ghosts later. Don't be alarmed. They can't harm you. At most, they'll make you feel a little cold." They filed into the Great Hall. Students from the older years were already seated at 4 long tables under thousands of floating candles. The tables gleamed with plates and goblets. At the head of the hall, on a raised platform, sat the teacher's table. Behind it, Professor Dumbledore and the other staff were gathered. Professor Sprout set a small 4-legged stool in front of the first years and placed a pointed, patched hat on it. The sorting hat looked ancient and grimy, as though it hadn't seen a brush in years. At the sight of it, the teachers and many older students all touched their ears at once. A seam opened in the hat's brim, and it began to sing. As the sorting hat launched into its song, Avada's face went white. He quickly drew his wand and muttered, "Muffliato." The charm took hold, and for him, the world went still. The song muffled into silence. When the hat finished, the hall erupted into applause, celebrating the ritual. Avada relaxed and flicked his wand, canceling the charm. Professor Sprout stepped forward with a list of names. "When I call your name, come up, place the hat on your head, sit on the stool, and be sorted." "Michael Duncan," A blond boy hurried up and nearly toppled off the stool as the hat shouted, "Gryffindor!" The Gryffindor table cheered. "Shabby not!" "Hufflepuff!" came the roar from the rightmost table. "Henry Summers!" "Hufflepuff!" When Professor Sprout called, "Cho Chang!" Cho took a breath, smoothed her robes, and walked to the stool. Conversation rippled from the tables below. "Look, an Asian face, so rare here. Thought the first Chinese student graduated ages ago. This must be only the second. She's really pretty." The hat paused as it sat on Cho's head, then announced, "Ravenclaw." The Ravenclaw table erupted louder than before. "Baron Shafiq!" Baron gave Avada a quick smile, stepped forward, and put on the hat. It barely touched his hair before it called, "Slytherin." A few faces at the Gryffindor table muttered, "Decisive, goes straight to Slytherin. Not a good sort." A tall, red-haired student shot them a warning glance. Baron strode off toward the Slytherin table, clearly pleased. Professor Sprout checked her list and then hesitated. "Next, Mr. Ken." Murmurs and chuckles ran through the hall. "What's with that? No full name? Maybe that's really his name." "Sounds lazy. Did his parents just call him Mr. Ken?" "Last time someone had a weird name like that." "Shut up, you idiot." Avada sighed to himself, rose, and walked forward with everyone watching. He sat, the hat was placed on his head, and the room waited, silent but expectant. 7. "No Azkaban, no Azkaban." At the same time, the Sorting Hat's whispers started echoing inside his head out of nowhere. Holy crap, this name." Avada's eye twitched and he muttered under his breath, "Not Azkaban, not Azkaban." "Not Azkaban?" the hat asked faintly. "Have you made up your mind? You could be great, you know. It's all up to you. Azkaban could undoubtedly help you achieve glory." "What the hell?" Avada snapped, furious. "Haha, just kidding. Why are you so nervous? Don't worry. I don't have the power to sort anyone into Azkaban, nor will I do anything to you because of my name." The Sorting Hat chuckled, then fell into a serious analysis. "Seems not very brave, lacking in courage and drive, tends to be cautious. Gryffindor is not suitable. No ambition, not much desire for dominance. Slytherin won't do either. Curiosity is strong, a thirst for knowledge, and a very distinctive logical mind. The heart is kind, diligent, and down to earth, values friendship and trust. Seems to even like cooking. Which to choose? Which to choose?" Avada's face twitched. He wanted to ask what was going on, but the hat hesitated for a full 3 minutes before finally calling, with effort, "Then Hufflepuff." "Not bad," Avada smiled faintly. It was pretty much what he'd expected. He stood and, to cheers and applause, made his way to the Hufflepuff table and took a seat toward the back next to a handsome young wizard with brown hair. "Cedric Diggory, second year. Nice to meet you, Ken." The boy Cedric smiled and extended his hand. Avada shook it, recognizing him at once. So this was Cedric Diggory, the only Hufflepuff to stand out in the original story, the one who died at Voldemort's hands, who was later reborn as a vampire and became Batman. But with him here this time, he wouldn't die. "Mind if I ask?" Cedric said quietly, poking Avada. "What's with your name? Why won't the professor say your full name?" "Unfortunately," Avada replied with a wry smile, "Professor Dumbledore told me not to reveal my name to others easily." "Professor Dumbledore?" Cedric's reaction matched Baron's and Cho's earlier. "All right, I'll tell the others not to ask. Don't worry, that won't affect your life in Hufflepuff. No one will care." "Thanks," Avada said gratefully. As they talked, the sorting ceremony wound down. After the last first year was sorted into Ravenclaw, Dumbledore stood, spreading his arms and smiling more brightly than usual. "Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Hogwarts. I know you must all be famished and eager to feast, but before we eat, I have a very important announcement. I want to welcome a new member of our staff." He glanced toward the faculty table, motioned with his eyes, and continued. "Professor Benjamin Baker will be joining us as Hogwarts Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. He's a director of the International Black Magic Defense League and, in his younger years, adventured through Greece, Eastern Europe, and Africa, confronting countless dark wizards and creatures. He brings exceptionally rich experience in dealing with the dark arts. I am confident that under his guidance, your defense against the dark arts skills will improve greatly." A tall, refined man in his 30s or 40s stood among the faculty to polite applause. He looked gentlemanly rather than weathered. Dumbledore smiled and raised his hand. "So, now I only have 3 words to say. Let's eat." No sooner had he finished than the empty platters filled with all manner of food, giving off warm, inviting aromas. The variety was so vast that even Avada, who'd lived 2 lives, couldn't name everything. British, Italian, French, Turkish, Russian, and even a few dishes that looked unmistakably Chinese and Japanese. Well, British main courses were still meager, but the desserts made up for it. "Wow!" someone shouted, not because of the food alone. Dozens of translucent, pearly-white ghosts drifted from the walls and under the tables, floating through the great hall with all sorts of expressions. "Oh, first years?" The fat friar bobbed by Avada and the Hufflepuff first years. "Welcome to Hufflepuff, and I wish you all a happy 7 years of study." "Thank you. Who are you?" one of the first years asked. "This is the fat friar, Hufflepuff's ghost," explained a broad student. He was a clergyman in life, though the senior clergy accused him of treating pox by poking peasants with a stick, and he used to conjure rabbits from the communion cup. He was eventually executed. "Cough, no need to dredge that up, Truman," the fat friar sniffed. Cedric added, "Hufflepuff's history of magic basically relies on him for tutoring. Professor Binns' class is really—" He broke off to stab at something he'd never seen before, tasted it, and brightened. "What is this? It's amazing, so new." Avada recognized the dish at a glance, tasted a piece, and raised an eyebrow. "It's roast goose, Chinese style. Pretty authentic. Looks like the house elves' recipes have expanded." Cedric forked another piece and smacked his lips, clearly wanting more. "The start of term feast is always the most plentiful. I wonder when I'll get roast goose again?" "If you really want it," Avada said around a mouthful of chicken pot pie, "you could try getting on better terms with Cho, the Chinese girl sorted into Ravenclaw. I spoke with her on the train. Her family's from Jiangnan. She might know how to make this." He paused. In the original story, Cedric and Cho had been a couple, hadn't they? If his remark pushed Cedric and Cho together, was it coincidence or fate, like one of Trelawney's prophecies? When everyone had eaten their fill, the remaining food vanished from the platters, and the plates and cutlery shone clean. Dumbledore stood again. The great hall fell silent. "I imagine everyone has now eaten and drunk their fill. A few notices for the start of term. First years, please note the Forbidden Forest on the school grounds is strictly off-limits. Older students should remember this well. Mr. Filch, the caretaker, also asks that you do not use magic in the corridors between classes. Quidditch tryouts will be held in the second week of term. Students wishing to join their house teams should contact Madam Hooch." And finally, Avada noticed the professors' faces twitch slightly. "Before you go to bed, let us all sing the school song." Dumbledore waved his hand, and lines of glowing lyrics appeared in the air. "Everyone choose your favorite tune. Ready, sing." That night, Avada discovered the true meaning of chaos. The hall erupted into a dozen different melodies at once. "Hogwarts, Hogwarts, teach us something, please, whether we be old and bald or young with scabby knees. Our heads could do with filling, with some interesting stuff, for now they're bare and full of air, dead flies and bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing, bring back what we forgot. Just do your best, we'll do the rest, and learn until our brains all rot." Wait, who used the Ilvermorny school tune? 8. Disguise Magus's Celebration. After the raucous school song finally died away, the welcoming feast came to an end. Students broke into groups and streamed out of the great hall. A tall girl with pink hair led the Hufflepuff contingent through a side exit and down to a shadowed corner where a stack of large wooden barrels sat over a stone trough. Avada stopped and stared. The red glow around the girl, her life force signature, was far more complex than he'd seen before, and it seemed to be hooked into her mind in a way that most people's weren't. From years of studying magic and observing magical structures, he could tell the extra strands in her life magic looked like transfiguration work. "First years, pay attention," she said in a clear voice. "This is the entrance to our common room. To get in, you tap the bottom of the second barrel in the middle row to the rhythm of Helga Hufflepuff, like this." She tapped the wood 7 times. The lid turned, and a passageway opened down into the basement. "If anyone tries to get in without the right rhythm, taps the wrong barrel, or taps the wrong number of times," she warned, "another barrel will open and douse the intruder with vinegar." Avada's eyes lit up. "So if we want to cook for ourselves, Can we use this to get extra vinegar? Someone called excitedly. Yes, the tall girl laughed. Congratulations, you've just found the main source of vinegar for Hufflepuff picnics and tea parties. Cedric, standing to one side, suppressed a laugh and added, the type you get is random. Sometimes it's apple cider, sometimes dark grape, sometimes coconut or white vinegar. 2 years ago, someone even got a whole barrel of balsamic, another student chimed in. The whole house was buzzing, 3 picnics of properly fancy Italian food, and even Slytherin came sniffing around to freeload. Of course, not every batch is a hit, Cedric continued. If you get vinegar you don't want, give it to the house elves or store it for later. Gabriel Truman led the way down the passage. Hurry along, everyone. Back to the common room. And don't forget, there's another feast tonight. Another feast? The first year's chorus puzzled and earned only a mysterious smile as an answer. They followed into the Hufflepuff common room. It was low and circular, with round windows that looked out over swaying grass and dandelions, promising a sunny outlook by day. Copper ornaments gleamed and plants hung from the ceiling or sat on the sills. Against the far wall stood a honey-yellow wooden mantel carved with a badger. Above it hung a portrait of Helga Hufflepuff. Soft sofas and armchairs in yellow and black were arranged around the hearth. Before Avada could take it all in, a burst of excitement interrupted him. Hufflepuffs, rejoice! A freckled boy with curly brown hair bounded to the fireplace and with theatrical flourish announced in an orator's tone, a new Auror has finally been born after a 4-year vacancy. She is Hufflepuff's own big sister, higher than a prefect, a shape-shifting metamorph magus who prefers not to have her full name said aloud. Nigh, Tonks, he began, then froze under the tall girl's warning glare, forcing himself to stop. He recovered instantly and continued as if nothing had happened. Over the summer, she passed the Auror office's assessment and is now an Auror in training, the first Auror from Hufflepuff in 20 years. If she gets 5 NUT certificates this year, her path to becoming an Auror will be clear. Someone snorted. Ha, Newt certificates? Cedric whispered to Avada, trying not to laugh. That's Rolf Scamander, a 4th year, grandson of the famous magizoologist Newt Scamander. Everyone teases him about his professor sharing the same name as the exam. Rolf just waved and moved back with a sheepish grin as the spotlight fell on the real star, Tonks. She grinned, her hair flashing from pink to bright red. Let me give you the situation, she said. For the first half of the year, I'll be at the Auror office for 6 months training, so I won't be around to tutor defense against the dark arts. I hope the new professor will teach you well. She hesitated, then shrugged. I'll be back after Christmas for the second half of term to prepare for my NETs, but honestly, she laughed a little awkwardly. They recruited me mostly for my metamorphmagus ability, not my exam results. Good-natured laughter rippled through the room. But don't think I'm useless, she added, more seriously. You all know my defensive magic, and with you-know-who gone for 10 years, more Death Eater remnants are being caught and Britain is getting safer. Maybe in a few years, Aurors will be idle, because the dark wizards will be almost all rounded up and the wizarding world will be at peace. I hope that day comes, Rolf said, sighing. He flicked his wand and a large glass of butterbeer appeared before each person. Don't tell Professor Sprout. I arranged this with the house elves. If she finds out, I'll be in detention. Then, to peace, Tonks raised her glass. To peace, the Hufflepuffs echoed, draining their butterbeer. The first years, unsure but impressed, followed suit. The butterbeer was excellent. Tonks lowered her voice conspiratorially and shifted her hair to a warm butterbeer brown. A little secret. Someone at the Auror office said the boy who defeated you-know-who when he was a baby, Harry Potter, will be coming to Hogwarts next year. She sighed with regret. It's a pity I won't be here to see him. You must all admire him for me. She tossed her hair and raised her glass again, now magically refilled. To Harry Potter! To Harry Potter! The room called, and the Hufflepuffs drank another round with enthusiasm. All right, that's enough for today, Tonks said, wiping her mouth and laughing. The new students still need to find their dorms. I'm off to the ministry tomorrow to start my Auror training. I wish everyone a safe and successful school year, and I hope you new students feel the warmth of Hufflepuff. To Tonks, Rolf shouted, and the room chimed in. After the third glass, the small celebration wound down. The older students said their goodbyes and drifted back to the dorms. Cedric, Gabriel Truman, and others shepherded the newcomers, showed Avada and the others the common room's layout, handed out first-term schedules, and led them to their dorms. 2 feasts in a row had left everyone exhausted. One by one, they changed into pajamas and fell into sleep. 9. The battle over the nature of magic. Class is in session. Class is in session. At dawn, the new students of Hogwarts stirred with excitement. They rose early, clustered into groups of 3 to 5, ate breakfast in the Great Hall, and after wandering the castle's chaotic stairways for a while, finally found the classroom for their first lesson. Charms. They waved their wands with eager fingers and flipped through the standard book of spells, Grade 1, chattering about incantations and the theories they barely understood. The Charms class that year was a combined Hufflepuff and Slytherin group. In the entire room, there was only one person wearing a green-trimmed robe, sitting quietly and reading a textbook. Avada? When Avada walked in, he immediately spotted that lone student in the front row and couldn't help but be surprised. "You're up this early too?" As a transmigrator, he'd been more excited than most the night before and had slept poorly. He still felt a little tired. "Good morning, Mr. Ken," Baron Shafiq said with a smile. "I didn't expect to see you so soon. Want to sit here? Front row seats are hard to come by." Avada thanked him, pulled out a chair, set down his bag, and sat beside Baron Shafiq. He pretended to browse the textbook. He had read it cover to cover over the summer. Gradually, other Slytherins and Hufflepuffs who had slept better filed in, clustering by house to form 2 distinct patches of color, yellow and green. Avada and Baron Shafiq sat between them, a small dividing line. At last, a small wizard, almost goblin-like and swathed in a robe that trailed the floor, entered. He moved a stack of books from under the podium, hopped up on it, and standing half-hidden, announced in a high, cheerful voice, "Let me introduce myself. I am Professor Phileas Flitwick, your charms teacher and head of Ravenclaw. Before we begin, roll call." He drew a parchment and peered at it, brow creasing slightly. "Mr. Ken, present," Avada answered, drawing a few sideways glances and the faint buzz of whispers. Cedric had warned the Hufflepuffs not to ask about his name. The Slytherins didn't know that. "Mr. Baron Shafiq, present." Baron Shafiq hesitated for a beat, puzzled by the Mr. attached to his name. "Mr. Shabby Not, present." It was only then that Avada realized Professor Flitwick had been adding Mr. or Miss before every name on his list. "Very good, everyone's here." After the last name, the professor tucked the parchment away, looked around the room, and continued. "When I came in just now, most of you were already reading your books. That's a good habit. So, what did you think of the textbook?" Several hands shot up at once. "Mr. McNair," he called on a Slytherin. A tall, thin boy stood and proclaimed proudly, "The spells in there are very simple. I knew quite a few already at home." "Very good." Professor Flitwick smiled and then called on a Hufflepuff girl. "Miss White, your thoughts?" "It feels magical," she said shyly. "I never imagined there could be so many wonderful spells in the world, doing so many incredible things." A low laugh rippled from the Slytherin side, and Baron Shafiq frowned slightly. The professor called on a few more students, accepting various answers, then nodded. "Clearly, you're all eager to learn magic. Let me ask a different question. Has anyone carefully read the preface of this book?" The classroom went quiet. They were 11 and dazzled by strange words and spells. Who would read a long, obscure preface? After a moment, a hand crept up from beneath a desk. It was Avada. He had read the preface. It had helped him frame the magical world. He hadn't planned to draw attention to himself, but he couldn't stand by and let the professor's lecture fizzle out. Reluctantly, he raised his hand. "I did." Professor Flitwick looked pleasantly surprised. None of the first years in previous years read the preface. "Mr. Ken, would you care to share your thoughts?" Avada's face twitched in annoyance, so much for staying low, but he stood, collected himself, and said, "The preface is deep. I don't understand all of it, but it seems to discuss the essence of magic, why we can use it, and some recent findings in magical research. It mentions terms like essentialism and coverage theory. I don't understand those yet." Not understanding is precisely the point. If you could understand everything in the book on your own, what would you need me for? Professor Flitwick chuckled and waved him down. 2 points to Hufflepuff. Mr. Ken is right, he went on. Ever since wizards first realized their abilities and separated themselves from muggles, debates about the nature of magic have never ceased. Why is it that 2 people can be both human, and yet one can cast spells while the other cannot? Why does our apparently orderly natural world permit phenomena like magic that seem to break its laws? What exactly is the essence of magical power? His face grew solemn. Those are questions we still have no final answers to, but as our studies have progressed, we've eliminated many erroneous ideas and inched closer to the truth. In ancient times, an ontology theory held that magical power was a supernatural force contained within a wizard's body. Discoveries since have shown that cannot be the whole story. We now know that magical power pervades the natural world, and that wizards can only use some quality within themselves to influence and shape it. A question from the class? A Slytherin, restless, interrupted without raising his hand. How do current mainstream views explain magical power? There are 3 mainstream views today, Professor Flitwick replied. We call them essentialism, coverage theory, and inherent theory, the last of which has only emerged in recent decades. He explained each patiently. Essentialism holds that magical power is the fundamental essence of all matter and energy. Everything can be transformed to and from magical power and is dominated by it. Coverage theory posits that magical power is a substance or energy existing on a higher plane, covering our world from beyond its dimensions and thereby influencing everything below. An inherent theory, born at the start of this century, largely inspired by Muggle science, argues that there is no separate thing called magical power in nature. Instead, it suggests that all matter and energy have inherent attributes capable of producing magical effects spontaneously. According to this view, what we call magic is just the medium that triggers those effects. The students' faces shifted between shock, confusion, and thoughtful interest. Professor Flitwick paused, letting the ideas settle. None of these theories is yet definitively proven or disproven. If anyone here could conclusively prove or refute one of them, you would go down in the annals of magical history. Not even the Order of Merlin, first class, could encompass 1% of your achievement. He brightened. I hope a wizard of that caliber will be born in this very classroom. The students' eyes grew eager. Satisfied that the discussion had caught fire, Professor Flitwick tapped the blackboard with his wand. Now, let us take our first step toward exploring the mysteries of magic, he beamed. For our first lesson of term, we will learn the levitation charm. 10. First day of class. For Avada, Professor Flitwick's debate about the essence of magic was never in doubt. He'd known from the start that essentialism was the right answer. That conviction sprang from an ability no one else could see, and he couldn't possibly answer when asked, "How did you prove essentialism?" with, "I saw it with my own eyes." If he said that, he'd be laughed out of, or worse. So even though he had practically mastered the material over the summer, he listened closely in charms anyway. When Professor Flitwick handed out feathers and told everyone to practice, Avada hesitated, tempted to show off by casting a perfect levitation charm at once. While he hesitated, Baron beside him made his feather float after a few failed attempts and earned Slytherin 5 points. Avada quickly cast the charm himself and became the second successful student, earning Hufflepuff 2 points. Wait, did you do it on your first try just now? Baron asked, turning with real surprise. Cough, just luck, Avada said, laughing to cover his slip. Baron barely noticed and kept waving his wand, working to smooth out his levitation charm. Avada watched for a beat, then offered, try flicking your wrist slightly outward when you move your wand. Don't overdo it, just get the motion right. Baron raised an eyebrow. That's not in the book or what Professor Flitwick said. Just try it. There's no harm, Avada urged, and demonstrated a levitation with a small outward wrist flick. The feather floated steadily. Baron tried the motion, angling his wrist as Avada had shown and speaking the incantation. When the feather rose, his eyes lit up. That's so much easier to keep. What did you do? I just fiddled with it over the holidays, Avada lied smoothly. In truth, his magic senses had let him see the disturbance in Baron's casting. He had computed a subtle optimization. He couldn't explain that without revealing himself, and even then the improvement came from long observation, and his mind wasn't fast enough to optimize complicated spells on the spot. Baron's eyes glittered. "I want to ask Professor Flitwick." "Go ahead." Baron raised his hand. Flitwick came over, listened to the demonstration, and smiled. "You two were lucky to stumble on an optimization yourselves," he said. "Textbooks show the standard, most universal way to cast a charm. As a witch or wizard grows stronger and understands magic more deeply, they'll naturally develop techniques that suit their style. For instance, that little outward flick can reduce the energy needed to sustain the levitation charm. If you let the tip of your wand droop slightly and emphasize the D sound in the incantation, the effect is even better. But don't get carried away with optimizations. Build a solid foundation first and practice the basics thoroughly. That's what you should be doing at this stage," Flitwick warned. "Understood, Professor," Avada and Baron answered together. When the bell rang, Flitwick hopped back onto his stack of books, clapped his hands, and wrapped up. "That's all for today. Students who haven't mastered the levitation charm, practice more. If you can all master it within a week, I'll show you something extra and interesting. No homework. Class dismissed." He leapt off the podium and was the first out the door. Some students followed, others stayed, frowning at their uncooperative feathers. Baron checked his timetable. "Next is herbology with Ravenclaw," he said, slinging on his backpack. "You're headed to History of Magic, right? I heard that's the most boring class." Avada sighed. "Yeah, and Hufflepuff won't see our dean's class until tomorrow. Haha, I'm off. See you around." See you." Professor Binns was an ancient-looking ghost, the only ghost professor at Hogwarts. The story went that he had stood up angry about something one day, left his body in an armchair by the staff room fire, and never realized he'd died. As a ghost, he could take on a workload no living professor could, and his knowledge was enormous and unfading, perfect qualifications for history of magic. The only problem was his lectures, which were monotone and soporific, with a built-in hypnotic quality. Few can perceive the unique charm within the vastness of history. Most treat it as mere stories, fixated on the gossip of famous figures. Binns droned in the opening class for Hufflepuff and Gryffindor. He tried, as usual, to rouse them. The multitude of beings propel the wheel of history, its course changing and developing, sometimes lit by flashes of genius that open new paths. You, I, and everything around us are part of history. Studying history is studying ourselves, our society, so we can learn from the past and predict the changes of the times. Faint snores began to come from the room. Binns kept on. "Strictly speaking, our history of magic is divided between wizard history and the history of magic. Wizard history explores the changing circumstances of wizards, the building of magical society, interactions and conflicts with other races, closely tied to Muggle history." The snores swelled into a rhythmic chorus. History of magic recounts the emergence of spells and alchemical inventions and how they reshaped history. The first flying broomstick, the first portkey, inventions like apparition, aguamenti, and the shield charm, each profoundly affected magical society. Avada fought to keep his mind active, and by the end was the only student really listening. He'd slept poorly the night before, and Binns's voice felt like a soft blanket trying to smother him, but the content itself was genuinely fascinating. Comparing it to what he already knew deepened his sense of the magical world. After history came flying with Ravenclaw. Cho Chang displayed the expected talent and earned Madame Hooch's praise. Avada's roommate, Shabi Knot, surprised everyone with excellent control and was told by Hooch that he had potential to be a professional Quidditch player. Avada's own flying wasn't impressive. His magic senses could make a broom come into his hand at a shouted "up," but he lacked balance, depth perception, and coordination, things flying class demanded. In the afternoon, Professor McGonagall taught transfiguration. She demonstrated advanced transformations, turning herself into a cat, then the podium into a lion, that made Avada's head swim. The students responded with enthusiasm, then frustration, as they tried to change a matchstick into a needle. After 20 minutes of exchange and failed attempts, Avada couldn't bear it any longer. He waved his wand, and his matchstick became a tiny needle, the first successful transformation in the whole classroom. Hufflepuff earned 5 points. 11. Room of Requirement Discovery Project. Astronomy was only on Wednesday evenings, and the first class of the term had given no homework. After their afternoon lessons, the year ones were listless. Avada wasn't about to waste such a precious window of time. The location of the Room of Requirement, the most mysterious and useful room in Hogwarts, was already lodged in his head. If he could get in, his plan would take a huge step forward. Ravenclaw's diadem, the broken vanishing cabinet, and a secret place to conduct his own research. There were other prizes, too. The room's peculiar magic, the construction of the diadem and the vanishing cabinet, the fragments of Lord Voldemort's soul, and countless other enchanted items. If he could map them with his magical senses and develop spells from that knowledge, nothing in the wizarding world was more valuable to Avada than that room. So after Transfiguration, he headed for the Great Hall with the other students, planning to go up to the 8th floor after supper. A Hufflepuff never missed a meal. "Hey, Ken," someone called. Avada looked toward the voice and saw Baron emerging from the opposite corridor, waving. "Fancy seeing you here." He nodded to his Hufflepuff classmates, then slipped away from the group and fell in step with Baron. "How was your first day?" "Not bad." Baron's lips curved. "Most of it was what my parents taught me, but casting spells with my own wand is a brand new experience. You?" "It went fine. I'd learned most of the spells over the summer, so it wasn't hard to keep up. Professor Bin's voice in History of Magic is a bit hypnotic, though. The subject itself is pretty interesting." "You think History of Magic is interesting?" Baron brightened at finding a kindred spirit. "I was actually the only one awake in that class. Even the usual good students were nodding off." "No surprise," Avada chuckled. "Same here. I half suspect Professor Binns is unconsciously using hypnotic magic. He'd only said a few sentences before there were snores all over the classroom, even though the material was fascinating." "Yes," Baron sighed. "My parents have always said our family's glory is written in history. Everything we enjoy now comes from the deeds of the past. As purebloods, it's our duty to remember history and protect the truth. We must recall both the honor and the wickedness that stains it, learn from it, and avoid repeating those evils. That's how our glory endures." "Admirable." Avada was about to compliment Baron and continue their talk about history when he suddenly stiffened and reached out to stop him. "Hold on. There's a trap ahead." Within seconds, Avada had read the magical pattern along the corridor. He relaxed, a smile tugging at his mouth. "Finite incantatum." He flicked his wand. A white light spread, sweeping the section of floor ahead. One patch of stone squirmed and sagged as if turning to mud, then blinked back into ordinary tiles after the charm took effect. He sheathed his wand with a flourish and glanced toward the corner with a teasing look. "Two seniors, don't hide, come out." Two almost identical red-haired twins slouched into view, looking sheepish. Baron's eyes widened as he remembered the Gryffindor legends their Slytherin seniors had warned him about the night before. "Merlin's beard, that's a total flop," one of the twins muttered, hands on his hips. "We spent half a term on that moving swamp, and some little kid who just learned the levitation charm broke it." "How did you do it?" the other demanded. Avada feigned amusement at the twins' bafflement and lied smoothly. "I've been self-studying a lot. Disarming traps from Defense Against the Dark Arts happened to be one of the things I picked up." "Oh, are you Gryffindor's notorious pranksters, Fred and George Weasley?" "Hufflepuff, Ken, pleased to meet you." He inclined his head. "Oh, it's you, the one whose name cannot be mentioned," one twin cried, then turned to Baron. "Then you must be his meal disciple. Slytherin, Baron Shafake. An honor to meet the prank animagi," Baron said deadpan, rolling his eyes. "Prank animagi?" The twins froze, then exchanged looks that lit up with mischief. "Why didn't we think of that before?" "Haha, ultimate prank status, on par with Animagus and Metamorphmagus. The prank animagi. As expected of a Slytherin who can make friends with a Hufflepuff, your naming game is strong." The twins dashed off, whether to flee the scene or to loudly proclaim their new title, no one could tell. Baron's forehead pulsed with a vein as he muttered, "That term's derogatory. I should have called them deduction animagi." "They'd probably like that even more," Avada said with a chuckle. "Let the name spread. Eventually, Professor McGonagall, the real animagus, will sort them out. Now we'd better get to being meal disciples." Baron was still visibly annoyed as he bit harder into his chicken leg. I finally understand that expression the seniors used yesterday. Setting a hidden trap for first years, openly admitting your prank animagi, and trying to compare yourselves to Professor McGonagall, is that how Gryffindor courage is spent? After they split up, Avada waited until the corridor was quiet and slipped up to the 8th floor. He stopped opposite the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy, being clubbed by a troll, and casually swept his magical senses over the stretch of wall concealing the room of requirement. I don't understand it. Get the Horcrux first, he thought. The room of requirement only appears for those who truly need it, he murmured, then smirked inwardly. No one needed the room more than me. I know how important what's inside is. He paced, thinking, I need a room to hide things, and walked back and forth 3 times. The room's hidden magic linked with his eager mind and began to transform. Very quickly, a doorway materialized where there had been plain stone, revealing a suddenly vast, bright space. Avada pushed the door open and stepped into a cavernous room, lit and somehow impossibly full. Despite its size, every corner was cluttered. Flames burned in a basin of water, books turned pages by themselves, a partially finished, handmade golden snitch sat on a workbench. Intricate and unfamiliar magical signatures flooded his perceptions, both thrilling and headache-inducing. It reminded him of another great value of the Room of Requirement. Over 1,000 years of Hogwarts, students had stashed inventions, contraband, and proud projects here, leaving magical junk piled up like treasure mountains. Most of them weren't as complex as a Horcrux or the Vanishing Cabinet. Their principles were, in many cases, simpler and clearer. For Avada, that meant endless research materials and experiments. With his magical senses, he could make progress at a rate no one else could imagine. I'm rich, he whispered, wiping the corner of his mouth as if savoring the discovery. The barely decipherable magic all around sparked idea after idea in his mind. He only regretted his mediocre memory. He couldn't record every structure and fleeting inspiration racing through his head. 12. Horcruxes and Vanishing Cabinets. He hadn't forgotten his primary task. Stopping his casual observation, he stretched his magical senses and began to search inch by inch through the vast sea of magic for any notable signature. Soon a faint, unfathomable hollow appeared in his perception. Found it. In his experience, a magical void meant a sentient presence, and right now he was the only person in the room, so that extra void could only be the Ravenclaw diadem containing a fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul. He drew his wand and walked slowly toward the void, sweeping away rubble as he went. Before long, he stood over a shimmering, delicate diadem and reached out to lift it from the debris. There were no active curses on it, so it was safe to touch. He still didn't dare put it on. After all, it housed a malignant part of a soul. Remembering what the diary Horcrux had done, he couldn't predict what would happen if he wore it. The magic woven into the diadem was too complex to take in at a glance. He muttered as he examined it. The artifact contained 2 distinct magics. One was tied closely to the diadem itself, structured somewhat like human mental power, clearly the diadem's wisdom-enhancing enchantment. The other wove a strict protection around the void, the soul fragment, and its bond to the metal was looser. That, without a doubt, was the Horcrux magic. He frowned, turning the diadem over in his hands. Forcibly unraveling the structure that shields the soul fragment with mental power should be possible, he said to himself. That's the proper way to destroy a Horcrux without destroying the item. He did a quick calculation. With the current strength of his mental abilities and the complexity of that protection, if he labored with spells day and night without food, drink, or rest, it would take roughly half a year to break it completely. If anyone knew a first year could, in theory, unpick one of the most advanced dark arts in 6 months, they'd gape. But he had no intention of living on stimulants and glucose drips until he wasted away, and the Horcrux outlived him. He would wait until he was stronger and could dismantle the Horcrux's defenses without killing himself. True, a killing curse or fiend fire would work, but those would destroy the Ravenclaw diadem itself, and he didn't want that. Next target, the Vanishing Cabinet. He tucked the diadem safely into his robes and scanned the room. It didn't take long to find a large, ruined black cabinet. its surface eaten and pitted as if by acid. In the version of the story he'd read in his previous life, he'd always thought this object could change the wizarding world. Instantaneous transmission of objects, no complicated manufacturing, something a sixth year could repair, cleaner than flu travel, far faster than owls for communication. Imagine miniaturizing it to palm size, then combining it with flu technology so a person could connect a small cabinet to any other vanishing cabinet like a fireplace. Owls would be out of work. He'd long wondered why the wizarding world, which had developed apparition, pocket dimensions, space folding, and even boxes that contained entire worlds, refused to apply that technology to information transfer. Did owls have unemployment insurance? He studied the cabinet's broken magical structure. I need to figure out how this works, he thought. He resolved to accelerate his studies in spatial magic once he returned, maybe even borrow books on apparition for reference. Reluctantly, he took one last look at the ruined cabinet and left the room of requirement. First things first, secure the Horcrux. He closed the diadem into his robes, shut the room's door, watched it sink back into the wall, and then paced 3 times before that exact stretch of stone. I need a room only Avada Kedavra can open. I need a room only Avada Kedavra can open. He repeated the phrase until the door appeared again, revealing a tiny, empty room a few square meters in size. He placed the diadem in a corner, checked carefully for hidden wards, and left, satisfied, heading straight for the library. He needed to enrich himself fast, learn how the vanishing cabinet worked, and how to break Horcrux protections. Knowledge of the vanishing cabinet should be attainable by 6th year. After all, Draco Malfoy had repaired one in his 6th year in the original timeline. But the lore about Horcruxes went far deeper. Voldemort himself hadn't known the full function of Horcruxes until after his 6th year, and the book that detailed them, Secrets of the Darkest Art, was hidden away in Dumbledore's office. If he dared ask Dumbledore for it, the headmaster might very well send him to Nurmengard on the spot to keep Grindelwald company. So his plan, master everything from 1st through 7th year quickly, then try to sneak into the restricted section for clues. The problem was his memory wasn't perfect. He did remember that dragon claw powder could temporarily sharpen intelligence, so he might try to get some if he could. There was also a potion, wit sharpening, that did the same and could be learned in 4th year. He'd ask Professor Snape after potions the next day. He wasn't Harry Potter or a Gryffindor. Maybe Snape would be a little kinder to him than in the original story. Madame Pince's reminder about curfew finally hauled him out of the stacks. Dizzy and lightheaded from books and study, he stumbled back to the Hufflepuff common room. "Yo, Ken, why are you back so late?" his roommate Shabby Knot called from beside the fireplace. "While you were gone, the prefects gave us a first year's Hufflepuff orientation. I was going to look for you, but you were nowhere in the Great Hall. Where did you go?" "The library," he admitted, rubbing his temples. He still felt slightly off balance. "Only now I realize how little I know about magic. I'm Muggle-born, so my foundation is weaker than those from wizarding families. I have to catch up." Merlin's beard, "Don't be modest. You were the best in class today," Shabby scoffed, making a face that said, "Don't false humble me. You were the second to finish in charms and the first to succeed in transfiguration. If that's a poor foundation, then what are the rest of us? A big hole?" "Tell me about Hufflepuff things," Avada said. He'd been so absorbed in study, he'd neglected bonding with his housemates. "What should I know?" Shabby grinned proudly. "I'll give you the customary stuff the prefects passed down, things you won't find in the library. For example, every Sunday afternoon, weather permitting, the house arranges a picnic at a nice spot. If you're good in the kitchen, you can apply to a prefect to be a volunteer cook. We also have a common room tea party every Wednesday evening. The kitchen's right beside the common room entrance, the oil painting of a large basket of fruit. Tick the pear in the painting, it giggles and turns into a doorknob. Pull it, and it opens into the kitchens. House elves and Hufflepuffs get on well. You can borrow kitchen utensils freely, and if you're hungry late, you can go there for supper. 13. A unique defense against the dark arts course. Until he went to bed, Avada sat listening as Shabby and his 3 other roommates rambled on about Hufflepuff's culinary achievements and the cooking magic said to have been left by Helga, Hufflepuff herself. Their stories almost made him hungry. Fortunately, a certain senior arrived in time to stop this late-night temptation. He went to the kitchen and returned with a plate of fragrant baked cookies. Avada couldn't resist. With tears in his eyes, he ate several before going to bed and ended up skipping most of breakfast the next morning. Tragically, the first class of the day was Defense Against the Dark Arts. Avada had just learned from Shabi the day before that this subject in practice was very different from how it was portrayed in the novels. If you were to defend against the dark arts, you had to be able to fight, and to fight you needed to be in good physical shape. So Defense Against the Dark Arts doubled as a kind of PE and combat class. Students ran laps around the Black Lake, put on protective gear, and practiced in pairs. "Please, don't let the first class be strenuous," Avada prayed inwardly. He followed the big Hufflepuff group into the defense classroom, with Ravenclaws filing in behind them in their blue-trimmed robes. That reassured him. If there were combat drills today, at least he wouldn't be facing the fearless Gryffindors. When the bell rang, a tall, thin, refined, middle-aged wizard entered smiling and waving. "Good morning, everyone," he called. Although Headmaster Dumbledore introduced me at the start of term, some youngsters might have been too excited to listen, so I'll say it again. He turned toward the blackboard and, with a raised hand, caused a piece of chalk to float up and write a name neatly. Benjamin Baker. Benjamin Baker, he announced, member of the International Black Magic Defense League Council and an adventurer. I've traveled to Greece, Eastern Europe, and Africa, and have faced dark wizards and dangerous creatures many times. I hope to bring practical, useful knowledge to this course. He sounds so cool, a faint voice from the Ravenclaw said, probably a girl. He's an adventurer. Maybe he's as cool as Gilderoy Lockhart. Professor Baker ignored the murmurs and continued. When I first joined, many senior professors told me that the first lesson with new students must reveal the charm of this course to spark interest, so I prepared something special. He produced a device from beneath the podium, something like a projector. Then he tapped his temple with his wand, drew out a thin white thread of light, and fed it into the instrument. Everyone, pay attention. He waved his wand at the projector. A shimmering screen formed in midair, throwing up a dazzling sequence of images. On the display, Professor Baker, wand in hand, was locked in a fierce duel with a masked man in a luxurious black robe. The masked man swung several blades of blue light. Baker dodged, and the masked man sent a bright green spell where Baker was about to land. The ground beneath Baker's feet seemed to melt like water, and he slipped into the earth, avoiding the attack. Suddenly, Baker reappeared behind his opponent and launched a fireball. The masked man raised a shield, but it was an illusion. The real Baker stood a short distance away, concentrating on a far more powerful spell. When the masked man realized he had been tricked, he summoned a raging inferno that tore through the surroundings, forcing Baker out into the open. The two then engaged in brutal, close-quarters exchanges, wands flying like blades. At other times, they widened the distance, launching cascades of brilliant, devastating spells. At one point, the masked man even conjured a giant dragon, its steel claws and scorching breath driving Baker to the brink. After nearly 10 minutes of relentless combat, Baker proved superior. He slew the dragon, transfigured and altered the terrain, and used a clever mix of illusion and invisibility to bait the masked man's charging attack. Seizing the opening, he launched a decisive assault and defeated his opponent. The projection ended. The classroom was silent for a beat, then burst into exhalations and whispers. Merlin, that was terrifying. When that dragon appeared, my heart stopped. And that purple arrow, when it hit the professor's shoulder, I actually gasped. Avada's heart was pounding too. The sequence could have been a big-budget blockbuster. Long-range exchanges as spectacular as famous duels, close combat as tense as the most thrilling martial scenes. Professor Baker's mental power might not match Dumbledore's, but he was terrifyingly effective in direct combat. Baker let the students recover, then clapped to restore order. A wistful look crossed his face as he spoke. What you just saw was the most thrilling and proud moment of my adventuring career. It's not the epic duel of Dumbledore and Grindelwald, but it has its own significance. He paused, then continued. My opponent was Greek. Ethered the Ever-Ready. You may have seen his name on chocolate frog cards. True to his title, Ethered was extremely cautious. When fully prepared, he was almost unbeatable. I'd been investigating his dark organization in Greece and had defeated many of his lieutenants, so he wanted to finish me personally. He started planning months ahead, researching my movements, spreading false intelligence, launching attacks to wear me down, and using hidden agents in the local ministry to put pressure on me. He even created an insidious battlefield, anti-apparition wards, poisonous air, a cursed floor. Once you were in, you couldn't leave. Luckily, I wasn't completely taken by surprise. Many of his measures failed. Still, his traps and raw power nearly killed me. In the end, I managed to win, and after that I earned a seat on the Black Magic Defense League Council. He looked out over the amazed faces and smiled. I think you all now understand both the purpose and the appeal of defense against the dark arts. So let's begin our first lesson. How to use your wand. Some of you might think that using a wand is simply holding it, waving it in the prescribed ways, and speaking the incantation. That works in everyday situations, but it won't do in an intense duel. How should a wand be held so it's comfortable and stable? What stance lets you cast the fastest, most accurate spells in battle? These are the fundamentals of defense against the dark arts. Knowledge even experienced aurors may never fully master. Chapter 14, about Gilderoy Lockhart. Perhaps when your strength grows and you begin to form your own combat style, you can decide where to place your wand, how to grip it, and what stance suits your preferred magic. But right now, you have no practical experience. You only started learning magic a few days ago. So today, we're learning the most versatile, most standard stance, the sort even many aurors rely on, the sword-wielding stance. Hook your thumb around the wand, bend your index finger to support the tip, grip the shaft with the remaining 3 fingers, relax your shoulders, and lower your wrist. Stand with your feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent. Shift your weight to your left leg. Rest your left palm on your hip to help with auxiliary gestures. Tuck your chin, look straight ahead, and arch your back slightly. Professor Baker pushed the podium to the side and demonstrated the stance himself. This posture lets you move freely at any moment and control the distance from your opponent. He made a few quick, fencer-like hops. It also lets you cast short, quick spells without long preparation, so you can seize the initiative. And once you've mastered spell deflection and the shield charm, an outstretched wand can be your best defense, even against a surprise strike. He returned to a normal posture, waved his wand, and all the desks in the classroom vanished in a ripple of magic. Now, take out your wands, spread out from one another, and begin practicing this stance. I know this may seem a bit dull compared to your other classes, but it's absolutely essential. Basic groundwork. Here's a deal. If you do well in this class, I'll consider speeding up the syllabus and teaching you some simple but practical spells early. Some of those spells were crucial in the demonstration I showed you today. That was all it took. The students scattered with a whoosh, eyes glued to the stance diagram chalked on the board, each trying to copy it exactly. Professor Baker stepped down from the podium and began to patrol the room, correcting every slight mistake. Your hand is too high. Your whole right side is exposed. Relax your shoulders. This is for mobility, not turning you into a statue. Don't grip the wand so tight. Your wand is an assistant, not a mortal enemy. Don't twist your waist so much. You'll cramp up in a real fight. Shift your weight back. Right now you've got a horse stance. He became unexpectedly strict during the drills. Any deviation was immediately noticed. Even Avada and Cho, both athletic and quick, were corrected repeatedly. Once everyone could hold the stance properly, Professor Baker moved on to combat movement. Lunges, retreats, dodges, feints, blocks. By the end of a long series of exercises, even the most energetic students were sweating and out of breath. With about 10 minutes left, Baker waved his wand and the desks reappeared. Very good. All of you exceeded my expectations. Once everyone had sat, he clapped his hands and smiled. I thought it would take a whole class for you to get this right. I didn't expect you to meet the standard with time to spare. There isn't enough time to teach new spells now, so how about a question and answer? If anyone has questions about defense against the dark arts, ask away, and I'll answer them. Hands shot into the air. Faces were eager, bright with anticipation. He pointed at a Hufflepuff near the front. "Mr. Summers, your question?" "Professor," Summers asked awkwardly, "you're an adventurer and director of the Black Magic Defense League, so why would you come to Hogwarts and become a professor?" Baker smiled. "Mainly because I hit a plateau in my own development. I decided to pause my travels and my duties to consolidate my magical foundation. Teaching defense against the dark arts is perfect for that. It forces me to review the basics through the textbooks and, I hope, contributes to education as well. Teaching and learning reinforce each other, as the saying goes. Even a powerful wizard like you hits a bottleneck?" Summers persisted. "Of course," Baker replied. "Even Dumbledore has limits." He waved him down and picked another hand. "Miss Chang, what's your question?" Cho Chang stood, a faint blush on her cheeks. "Professor, do you know Mr. Gilderoy Lockhart?" Baker hesitated briefly. "I haven't met him in person, but I've long heard of his reputation and read many of his books. They're quite something, useful and well written. I've learned a great deal from the techniques he describes." "Then who's more powerful, you or Mr. Lockhart?" she asked. Baker chose his words carefully. "He and I have different strengths. From his books, I gather, Lockhart is a consummate adventurer, knowledgeable, quick-witted, with a vast store of obscure but practical lore. He's skilled at using his wits to get out of danger and deal with wild magical creatures. As for me, I'm more like an auror or an old-school dark wizard hunter. I specialize in entering man-made danger zones and dealing with the kinds of perils that come from other wizards and constructed traps. I do go into the wild sometimes for pleasure, but I'm more practiced in fighting in urban or structured environments." "Do you have any exciting adventure stories?" another girl asked. Baker gave a wry smile. "If I were to publish my experiences, they wouldn't sell anywhere near as well as Lockhart's. The things I deal with require professional expertise people won't understand. My stories aren't as dramatic, they're often convoluted and sometimes rather bloody." He leaned forward, letting the students' imaginations run a moment before picking an example. "Take Lockhart's latest book from last year, A Year with the Tibetan Yeti. It tells of him tumbling into a crevasse on the Tibetan plateau and finding a hidden subglacial world. His wand breaks, supplies run out, and he survives by using transfiguration, basic potions, and his knowledge of magical creatures, eventually masquerading as a Tibetan Yeti and living among them. In the tale, his cover is blown by a real Yeti, but through quick thinking and charm, he befriends it, and the Yeti helps him conceal his identity. They form a sort of unlikely camaraderie. When the glacier begins to close and the Yeti's habitat collapses, Lockhart and the Yetis cooperate, using knowledge and luck to escape back to the surface. He then bids them farewell and returns to human society." He paused, watching the girls who clearly idolized Lockhart listen with starry eyes, and softened his tone. "If I had been in that situation, he smiled with a touch of mischief. "I'd probably have climbed straight out of the crevasse on the first day. Wandless casting isn't so difficult for me." 15. Target from Snape. The bell rang and Professor Baker turned and left the classroom in a hurry, leaving a cluster of chattering first-years behind. "Does Professor Baker mean he's stronger than Lockhart?" one whispered. "Of course. Only the weak have to puzzle over problems. A powerful wizard can fix everything with a single spell. But Lockhart's a famous adventurer. That doesn't make him the strongest. He certainly isn't stronger than Dumbledore, and Lockhart's only an honorary member of the Dark Arts Defense League. Professor Baker is a director, several ranks above him." Avada listened without joining the gossip. In any field, relative strength mattered. Lockhart was a fraud looking for fame. Exposing him after he took office and restoring justice to his victims was already on Avada's to-do list. Professor Baker, by contrast, was genuinely formidable. In Avada's perception, Baker's vitality and mind were as potent as seasoned powerhouses like McGonagall or Flitwick, second only to Dumbledore. There was, however, something odd about Baker's mental makeup Avada couldn't quite put his finger on. "Hey, Ken," his roommate Joel Stebbins tapped him. "What's our next class? I forgot my schedule." Avada checked the parchment. "Potions with Slytherin." "Oh, unlucky," Joel groaned. "I heard from the upper years. Snape's the potions master. He's strict, harsh, and completely biased toward his own house. Apparently, since he took over, Slytherin has won the House Cup every year. Avada rolled his eyes. Even Hufflepuffs, who usually avoided gossip, had come to the same judgment. Snape's manner might be unbearable, but his teaching was formidable. Relax. At least we don't have to face him as Gryffindor, Avada said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. He left the classroom for the potions dungeon. The potions classroom lay in the dungeons, dark, damp, and colder than other parts of the castle. Shelves lined the stone walls, jars and specimens floating in murky liquids, lending the room an eerie, clinical air. Why use a place with almost no ventilation for potions? Somebody murmured. A kid could brew up some toxic fumes and wipe everyone out. Who knows? Baron muttered, rubbing at his nose. Our common room and dorms are worse, right under the Black Lake. Cold, wet, no air. I'll have rheumatism by the end of the term. Then perhaps you should try a cold remedy potion, Mr. Shafiq. If you had read the first-year textbook before term began, you might remember it. A flat, low voice cut in from above. Baron and Avada flinched and looked up into a pair of black eyes peering from beneath greasy hair. Also, we have adequate safety measures in this classroom. Do not display ignorance by commenting on things you do not understand. Hufflepuff, 1 point deducted. Avada's eye twitched. That voice, this was the man. 1 point deducted, Snape was being merciful, for now. If a Gryffindor had opened their mouth like that, they'd have been publicly shredded. Snape had arrived. Avada and Baron, sitting in the front row, felt the rest of the class fall silent more abruptly than before. Everyone had heard of the potions master. Now he pulled a sheet of parchment from somewhere and began roll call. Ken! Snape squeezed the name through his teeth. Avada's eyes widened. For a split second he was hit by an odd, unpleasant memory. Somehow his name seemed tied in Snape's mind to the painful loss of someone dear. He had been grateful he wasn't Gryffindor, thinking it might spare him Snape's harshest ire, but apparently his luck had changed. Here, he answered, voice small. Snape snorted in what might have been disdain, then returned to the list. Baron Shafiq. Here. John McNeil. Here. When roll call finished, Snape folded the parchment away and swept the room with a cold, oppressive stare. He spoke in a soft, precise voice that nevertheless filled the silence. Potions is a precise scientific discipline. Many of your previous teachers have tried to dazzle you with their subjects and spark your interest. Here, I regret to say, most of you will be unable to appreciate the art of potion craft. A wand is not required for most of what we do. Many of you may not even recognize this as magic. I do not expect you to understand the slow simmer of a cauldron, the faint perfume of steam, or the way a draught can seize the mind and alter the body. I can, however, teach you how to gain renown, brew excellence, and even avert death. But there is one condition. You are not the kind of untalented fools I so often encounter. The sentence hushed the room more completely than Snape's entrance had. Then, without preamble, he fixed his gaze on Avada. Ken, answer me. What is the recipe for a cold remedy potion? Avada stood, panic making his hands clumsy. He hurried through what he could remember. Fire salamander blood, cabbage, kudzu root. He faltered. His summer had been spent on spells and transfiguration and defense against the dark arts. Potions were memory-heavy, and he hadn't managed to learn the whole book. And powdered fire crab shells, he added, reaching for the last ingredient. Snape regarded him coolly. You can't even answer such a basic question. Sit down. Surprisingly, he did not deduct points. Perhaps he hadn't thought the student entirely to blame. Snapey moved on. This term we will begin with the Boil Cure Potion. It is a basic yet classic recipe. The techniques and principles used in it are consistent across most potions. I will explain the procedure once, then demonstrate, and after that you will work in pairs. He produced cauldrons, scales, and other instruments, sliding jars and bottles from under his desk with the economy of someone who had done this 1,000 times. His explanation sped up, precise, technical, utterly unadorned. This potion uses porcupine quill, serpent fangs, dried nettle. The proportions are, he wrote exact ratios on the board, then continued. Be careful when crushing serpent fangs. The specific technique matters here. The 3 boilings of the slug must be carried out in this order. If reversed, the potion will become inert. If you fail to cool after the first boiling, it will. He moved through the process with brisk efficiency, the students copying notes as if their lives depended on it. The role of the slug is to regulate the medicinal conflict between porcupine quill and serpent fangs. By Beaumont's first fundamental law, its own properties are insufficient, which is why it must be boiled 3 times and combined with. When he finished, Snape placed a cauldron on the center of the podium, the metal glinting in the dim light. "Now I will demonstrate." Snape waved his wand, and a huge projection sprang to life above the classroom, showing the podium desktop and his hands so everyone could see every detail. First step, weigh the ingredients and determine the ratios. We start with dried nettle. He moved through the preparation with practiced, precise motions. Next, crush the snake fangs. Watch my technique. Begin boiling the slug. Choose a slug with tentacles. When you boil it the first time, never put it into cold water. Make sure the water is boiling before you add it. Melting the porcupine quill. Attention! You must remove the pot from the fire and let it cool for a time before adding the quill, or you will have nothing but a mess. To save time for demonstration, I will cool it magically here. Do not do this yourselves. I fear many of you would blow up your cauldrons if you tried. And finally, Snape combined the slug infusion, which had been boiled 3 times, with the other ingredients and stirred at a particular rhythm and in a precise direction. Avada, sitting in the front row, could see Snape's hands without looking up at the projection. What unfolded in his perception nearly made him catch his breath. Through his magic sense, the raw, individual structures of the ingredients had always seemed chaotic and meaningless on their own. But as Snape added each component to the slug solution, their inner magic patterns began to mesh under the simpler structure of the infusion. They fused and rearranged into a regular, elegant, completely new construct. The whole process looked like restoring a shattered puzzle, smooth, logical, and oddly beautiful. He had sensed magic his whole life, and he knew the usual way to create a specific magical structure was to cast a spell, using will and mental focus to reshape ambient magic. This, though, was different. Potion making used the innate magic structures that lived in ingredients, and by combining and coaxing them, created effects that would be extremely difficult to produce by direct spell work, and it did so with minimal effort. Preparing this scab treatment potion had taken Snape only about 10 minutes. To build the same structure purely with a wand would have been no easier than learning a complex 6th-year charm like Aguamenti. Avada realized, with a rush of excitement, that potion making was an entirely new way to influence magic, one he had to master. He resolved then and there to learn potions well, no matter how much Snape disliked him. He would shamelessly beg for instruction if necessary. Snape finished, poured the liquid into a glass vial, and held it up. The potion was a pale blue, glowing faintly in the dim classroom light. "I will now distribute the materials for you to make this potion yourselves. Work in pairs. I would hate to discover any of you cannot even set up a basic experiment between 2 people. Miss White with Mr. Shabby, Mr. McNeil with Mr. Alex." He moved down the rows, grouping students by house. When he reached the front and saw Avada and Baron, a malicious little expression flickered across his face. "It seems Hufflepuff and Slytherin both have odd numbers. Mr. Ken, why don't you pair with Mr. Shafake?" "Excellent. Mr. Shafaki can supervise whatever remains of your brain, since you apparently cannot even remember the cold remedy potion formula, to prevent trouble in my classroom." He handed a kit to Avada and Baron and then began to patrol. "Do not mind him. He's taken a liking to you," Baron mumbled awkwardly to Avada. "The cold remedy potion is only taught next term. The fact you could recite most of that formula on your arrival already surprised him. He wants you to guide me, but he won't admit it," Baron added. "Focus on your experiment, no whispering." Snape reappeared at their table, tapped them both with a scrap of parchment, and sniffed. The 2 straightened and went to work. Baron weighed each ingredient carefully and passed them to Avada. Avada ground the snake fangs in a mortar, strike by strike, until they were a fine powder. Though the action was purely physical, he'd memorized the subtle magical reactions from watching Snape, so he knew exactly how fine the powder needed to be and whether it should slake or clump. He chopped the dried nettle, broke the porcupine quill into pieces, boiled water, and prepared the tentacled slug for boiling. The old recipes had been refined over generations and left little room for improvement, but they hid operational pitfalls. Avada noted one risk. If the quill were ground to powder to speed the reaction, the increased surface area could trigger part of the sequence too early and cause a chain reaction with other unreacted components, an explosive change that might resemble the incendio charm. He coordinated with Baron, boil, cool, add ingredients, boil, stir, cool again, following the notes and constantly monitoring the subtle shifts of magic with his senses. Their progress outpaced the usual chorus of minor explosions, hisses, coughing, and Snape's intermittent curses. At the final stage, the instructions read, stir clockwise 7 times, pause for 3 seconds, then stir counterclockwise twice. Avada had begun the stirring. After 5.5 clockwise turns, he paused for 2 seconds, then continued, something Baron noticed and frowned at. "Hey, you've got it wrong," Baron hissed. Avada didn't flinch. He kept stirring and said calmly, "Don't worry, I read about an alternate rhythm in the library. It should improve this potion. If it works, it'll be 2 or 3 times more effective than the standard version." He was lying about the precise improvement. Actually, he had noticed a flaw in the old stirring pattern while watching Snape. The mistake stood out in his magical perception, and he'd adjusted the motion. Baron nodded and let him continue, trusting the competence Avada had already shown in charms. When Avada finished the new stirring pattern, the color of the potion deepened from a pale blue to a rich, deep azure, darker than the sample Snape had made. Avada decanted it into a vial and presented it proudly to Baron. "Told you, trust me." "Amazing," Baron breathed, then raised his hand to summon Snape for inspection. Snape came over, peered into the vial, and did not praise them. He snorted and reached for a strip of meat from a shelf, some dead piece from an unknown animal, then waved his wand to make scabs appear on its surface. "Very well. Let us see what your improvement actually does." He uncorked the vial and let a few drops fall on the scabbed meat. The liquid hissed where it touched the skin. The flesh that contacted the potion blackened and dissolved as if scorched by acid, leaving a large charred patch. "So your genius method has tripled the potion's potency," Snape said flatly. "It no longer merely kills scabies mites. It burns the entire skin away, Mr. Ken. And if you think to dilute it with water to salvage it, don't bother. If you dilute this abomination, I shan't stop you. I rather enjoy a good firework display." 17. The Dilemma of Improving Talent. For the first time in his 2 lives, Avada realized that improving something didn't always produce better results. The realization made him unexpectedly respectful of the work of those who had come before him. Generations of inquiry and experiment had refined many fundamentals to their limits. Each advancement condensed thousands of years of experience. He couldn't simply overturn it with a new magic sense. That said, his respect had limits. Experience could also ossify thinking, and his magic sense might be the kind of unprecedented tool that deserved to question and improve long-established ideas. The problem was that questioning and improving required extreme caution. Otherwise, you ended up with a humiliation like the one he'd just suffered. After Snape's scathing reprimand and his own profuse apologies to Baron, who had been surprisingly understanding and comforting, Avada endured until the bell finally rang for dismissal. Snape dismissed the class and walked out. Most of the students stood and hurried for the door. The explosions and the lingering acrid smell had everyone eager to get away. The bottle of azure potion still sat on Avada's and Baron's desks, and many students passed by and glanced at the heavily criticized brew. Most only gave it a look and moved on. Their own attempts were far worse, so they were in no position to sneer. Even the Slytherins who had succeeded with their potions kept their distance out of respect for Baron. Avada didn't care about the looks. He quickly thanked Baron, grabbed his bag, and chased after Snape, catching up with him not far from the classroom door. "Professor, excuse me. Please wait a moment." Snape turned, eyebrows rising in mild surprise. He knew his reputation, and he didn't expect a student, especially one he'd just lectured, to follow him. "Yes? Professor, do you know about the wit-sharpening potion?" Avada braced himself for mockery and more reprimand. Snape's expression hardened into a smirk. "Ah, so our genius Mr. Ken has discovered that he isn't as clever as he thought and wishes to become smarter with a potion?" Avada swallowed, then persisted. Snape folded his arms and continued slowly, with distinctly clipped amusement. The wit sharpening? That's a fourth-year potion. It's difficult even for fourth years. Tell me, do you truly believe you've mastered everything taught from years 1 to 4? Or did you imagine the wit sharpening potion is like a scab healing potion, something that only takes a little effort and can be enhanced by your genius method? He turned a touch sterner. Besides, its effect only lasts about a day. Were you planning to drink it like water, enjoy a few months of genius, and then be an idiot forever? He looked at Avada with a satisfied, almost paternal condescension, and then walked on down the corridor. Avada wasn't stunned by the tone. He was more taken aback by the information. He hadn't expected the wit-sharpening potion to have a limited duration and side effects. It seemed he would have to analyze mental force bit by bit if he wanted any permanent improvement. Herbology with Professor Sprout was next. To Avada's surprise, Sprout kept them in the classroom rather than taking them to the greenhouses. They flipped through textbooks and took notes: classification of magical flora, common physiological structures, and a brief history of herbology. Sprout's reasoning was practical. Because they had no foundation in herbology yet, wandering the greenhouses would be pointless. First, they needed book knowledge. Later, they could translate that into practice. After dinner, Avada went straight to the library. He pulled a fourth-year potions textbook, determined to see if he could brew the wit-sharpening potion himself, observe its effects on mental force, and possibly develop a charm or potion that could permanently improve talent. He read the recipe from start to finish and finally understood Snape's earlier words, difficult even for fourth years. The ingredient names, the instrument types, the specialized techniques, the calculation formulas, and the dense web of symbols and terms shut him out. He couldn't glean anything useful about the potion's mechanism. To make sense of it, he'd need to master potions from year 1 through year 4, and he hadn't even fully memorized the first-year curriculum. He sighed inwardly and felt a fresh admiration for Hermione Granger, who, in another timeline, brewed polyjuice in her second year. What kind of prodigy could accomplish that? Avada's magic sense was excellent for researching physical objects, but for purely theoretical, symbol-heavy subjects, he was no better than any ordinary student. He closed the textbook and headed for the 8th floor stairs, intending to visit the room of requirement again. Around the staircase corner, he nearly walked into Professor Baker. Avada stopped and called out, "Professor Baker?" Baker stopped, then looked at him and smiled with instant recognition. "Mr. Ken, what are you doing here?" Avada had only met the professor once, but the man had remembered his name and face. He had a prepared excuse. "We have astronomy tomorrow, so I wanted to visit the astronomy tower and get familiar with the layout in advance." Professor Baker nodded and began to head downstairs. As he walked away, Avada studied him through his magic sense. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible incongruity to Baker's mental force. It wasn't an obvious abnormality, but it didn't feel quite right. Avada frowned. Mental force, he thought. He made a note to keep an eye on it. He went to the astronomy tower anyway, mainly to confirm that the professor wouldn't be sneaking back to spy. Then he returned to the 8th floor and slipped into the room of requirement. First, he retrieved the diadem from his private room, then returned to the room of hidden things to look for magical artifacts that matched his current research aims. There will be another update around 9 o'clock. The surprise of the crown. The surprise of the crown. Speaking of which, Ravenclaw's diadem enhances the wearer's wisdom, but because of that damned Horcrux, I don't dare use it now. Avada stared at the exquisite diadem that so many had desperately sought, at its staggeringly complex magical architecture, and sighed again. It felt like owning a treasure mountain he couldn't touch. If only Rowena Ravenclaw had left instructions for making this, I could just craft a new one myself. The thought surprised him. Why hadn't he thought of that before? The diadem's magical structure had been fully revealed to him. Although intricate, given enough time, he could replicate it by following it with his magical senses. He might even be able to analyze the purpose of some components as he reconstructed them, deepening his understanding of mind magic. That was Avada's unfair advantage. Compared to the technology of his previous life, The diadem was like a complex polymer known only for its properties, not its synthesis. He, however, had tools akin to an electron microscope. He could examine structure directly, in a sense, stack the material atom by atom. With enough alchemical knowledge, deducing a manufacturing process from structure wasn't impossible. Let's do it. He dove into analyzing the diadem. If not for the dire importance of both the Horcrux and the diadem, he would have wanted to keep the thing with him to study whenever he had a moment. I'll break down whatever clearly isn't a single unit into modules and analyze their functions one by one. Controlling his mind power as precisely as he could, he used his wand to reproduce the structures he saw in the void. Even after disassembly, the architecture remained complicated. Reconstructing it was painstaking. It took him more than half an hour to replicate the first module. Its function is linking to mental power. After finishing the replication, it took him another half day to grasp the module's role. This must be the bridge that links a person's mind to the diadem's wisdom-enhancing workings. The design is ingenious, but it's too complex to remember. Avada's poor memory was a real drawback here. Ordinary facts he could write down, carry, and rehearse later. But how do you record a magic structure? He could enchant a medium to hold the design, but any casual enchantment would snap back to its original state in minutes. If such magical records could be made permanent that easily, alchemy's millennia of research would be meaningless. Well, that was half a day wasted, he muttered. I guess I'll have to wait until I find the module that amplifies mental power and then keep adjusting my own mind until it aligns. Still, the work wasn't fruitless. Because he'd personally analyzed the module step by step, his understanding and memory of its mechanics were far deeper than anything learned by rote. After studying the first module, Avada felt he'd made solid progress in comprehending mind magic and linking magic, and he even had new insights. Hang on. What happens if this linking structure connects two minds directly? If the information transfer becomes one way and the link sinks into the subconscious, isn't that Imperio? He felt as though he'd stumbled on something incredible. What's the Imperio incantation again? Right? Imperio. Comparing the mental fluctuations produced by saying the word to the structure of this linking module, he tried to transform it into a one-way connection. After many trials, he discovered the module really could be adapted into something like Imperio. His understanding of mind magic wasn't yet complete enough to derive the canonical Imperio outright, but by applying and modifying what he already knew, he inadvertently found the prototype of a practical curse worth refining. Maybe Rowena Ravenclaw used the same principles as Imperio when she designed this diadem, he guessed. He had initially thought the structure might relate to legilimency, but he hadn't expected it to reveal an unforgivable curse. Perhaps it was simply the attraction between similar concepts. He didn't dwell on it and kept dissecting modules. 2 hours later, he'd analyzed 2 more modules and identified their functions as monitoring and protection, respectively, essentially an emergency cutoff system. If something went wrong with the wearer's mind or with the diadem, or if someone tried to break into the diadem's interior through the mental interface, these modules would immediately sever the connection. Because their roles were so specific and modular, Avada couldn't mine them for new spells. It was worth noting, though, that Lord Voldemort's Horcrux did not integrate with these magical modules. Instead, it attached directly to the diadem's material layer, leaving its own magic untouched. He didn't know why Voldemort had chosen that method, and he was grateful he had. If a Horcrux with diary-level intellect had fused with the diadem's wisdom-enhancing magic and its fame attraction, it could have been catastrophic. Avalon suspected that alone, such a Horcrux diadem could dominate the wizarding world. Voldemort himself might not even need to appear. I need to research ways to destroy Horcruxes as soon as possible. I only have 5 years of relative safety left. He rubbed his scalp, feeling a headache coming on. Before term started, he'd thought he had plenty of time to settle in. Now it was only the first semester, and his schedule was already overflowing, analyzing the diadem, honing his talents, researching Horcrux destruction, studying potions and herbs, and self-studying advanced subjects. Oh, right, today's homework. He snapped to, returned the diadem to his private room, and headed straight for the library. After greeting a few acquaintances, he pulled out his assignments and worked furiously. First-year homework wasn't heavy, and everything felt trivial after dissecting Ravenclaw's diadem. Apart from one essay that took some time, he finished the lot with little trouble. As curfew approached, Avada made his way back to the Hufflepuff common room. When he lifted the barrel lid, a buzz of excited conversation hit him. Almost all the first-year students were clustered around several older pupils, chattering eagerly. "What are they talking about?" he asked, joining the crowd. "Tomorrow's common room tea party," someone exclaimed. "Wednesday is Hufflepuff's regular tea party. This is our first time getting to go as new students. Lots of older students will be there to answer our questions and help us get used to Hogwarts faster, and some new students from other houses are invited too. And I heard the volunteer cooks make particularly good desserts and drinks." Celebrating the signing, for another update, if you're enjoying this book, you can now cast your monthly vote. Chapter 19, Tea Party and the Finished Intelligence Enhancer. Avada's schedule was already giving him a massive headache, but he still had no intention of missing this commemorative tea party. He didn't exist only to kill Lord Voldemort. All he wanted was a peaceful, happy life. It was just that Voldemort's existence blocked his and most people's dreams, and Avada happened to possess the ability to eliminate him, so he pushed himself hard. But if he ever had free time, or if it was necessary, he wouldn't mind relaxing and socializing, enjoying a normal campus life occasionally. So the next day, returning to the Hufflepuff common room from the astronomy tower, he found an unprecedented scene. The entire common room seemed to have expanded several times over. Several long tables, probably borrowed from the kitchens, lined the room, piled with all kinds of pastries and drinks, cakes, cookies, scones, puddings, mousses, milk tea. In the open space in the middle, small round tables were scattered, each with a teapot and a few chairs. Wizards and witches milled about, helping themselves at the long tables or sitting around the round ones, drinking and chatting. The whole place had the lively feel of a big banquet. The only thing missing was the formal dress. People wore their usual casual clothes or pajamas, and some even had slippers on. Cho? Avada recognized Cho at a glance. She wasn't a Hufflepuff, deep in conversation with another boy. He moved closer and saw the boy's face clearly. Cedric. "Hey, Ken," the two of them called, waving and smiling. Avada joined them. "Hello, Cedric. Cho, were you invited to the tea party too? She's one of the volunteer chefs for this tea party." Cedric laughed, slapping Cho on the shoulder. Cho gave a small, embarrassed smile and a nod. "It's thanks to what you told me at the start of term feast that I discovered her cooking skills and invited her to help. Look over there. Those flaky scones and red date cakes are hers." Avada glanced over and saw several plates of delicate mooncakes and date cakes on a long table, already being snapped up. "Wait, what are those crooked things on that plate?" "Oh, those are things I tried to shape. Aren't they cute?" Cho rolled her eyes. "They taste fine, but Ced insisted on shaping some like nifflers. I couldn't argue with him, so that's how they turned out." Avada looked again and thought the shapes resembled quinpeds more than nifflers. One pastry with a broken crust that was supposed to be a mooncake almost looked like a Dementor figurine. "Keep it up," he said sincerely, wishing them well, then stepped away. No need to be the third wheel. "I never expected to be the catalyst for Cedric and Cho. Is it coincidence or fate? If it's fate, then what about me? What is my fate?" He had no idea whether Cedric and Cho became a couple in the original story or whether the original Department of Mysteries had made someone named Avada Kedavra. What he was sure of was that he wasn't a character in the original tale. If he were, things would be the same. If not, the story still unfolded the same way. Did his transmigration count for nothing? He hoped he wouldn't fail the first semester, at least. As he wandered, eyes scanning the room, Avada shook his head after a full circle. Is Baron really not coming? Baron, a relatively familiar friend, had been invited but refused. He muttered that a proper Slytherin should enrich himself first, not indulge in meaningless pleasures, and even tried to drag Avada off to the library. Avada had to admit he understood Baron. Proud, traditional, with a strong sense of honor and responsibility. Baron wanted to improve himself and restore his house's reputation. But he was young and a little naive. How could one person reverse centuries of reputation overnight? Avada hadn't said any of that aloud. They'd only known each other a few days, and he didn't want to be too frank too soon. He found his three roommates, Shabby, Summers, and Stebbins, and joined them, chatting about classes and life while sampling the treats, trading school life tips with some upperclassmen. As he drifted, he noticed a group in a more secluded corner gesturing animatedly. They took out potions, magical ingredients, and trinkets, passed them around to be inspected with wands, then exchanged goods for galleons and sickles. "Are those people selling things?" he asked. Shabby explained, "We rarely get a house-wide tea like this, so it's a perfect time to gather, trade needs, share resources, and because it's among our own, credit issues aren't a big deal. Transactions are easier." Avada was about to nod when an idea lit up his face. "You guys, can I buy a wit-sharpening potion there?" "A wit-sharpening potion? There's such a thing?" The three roommates reacted more strongly than Avada expected. "Quick, let's go see. If it exists, we have to get one." Dragged along by his roommates, Avada approached the upperclassmen selling potions. The first seller grinned and said it was no problem. "Wit sharpening potion? Easy. I don't have any ready-made, but I can brew one on the spot. It'll be ready by tomorrow afternoon. Don't worry, my potion skills are solid. My grades haven't dipped below an E since first year." "Really, that's great. We'll each take one bottle. How much is that in total?" The seller's grin widened. 4 galleons per bottle. That's 16 galleons in total. Thank you for your patronage." "How much?" All four of them froze. Avada had been in the magical world for over a month and had a rough idea of a galleon's purchasing power. He'd learned about the wit-sharpening potions brewing method only yesterday, hadn't checked ingredient prices, and didn't know what to expect. "Is it expensive?" The upperclassman blinked in mild confusion. "One bottle costs over 3 galleons just for the ingredients. Isn't it fair for me to take a fifth of the profit? This is already a friendly house price." He looked them over suspiciously. "You don't actually know anything about the potion, do you?" Avada glanced at his roommates, puzzled. "I need a wit-sharpening potion because I have something I urgently need to master. What do you need it for?" "Huh? Isn't it just a potion to make you smarter?" The three looked mystified. After a brief explanation, only Avada decided to pay and reserve a bottle of the wit-sharpening potion. Shabby and the others turned their disappointment into appetite and went back to raiding the pastries. Thanks to Bookfriend 2023 718.1252551923 for the reward, and Yellow Bird of Chuyu for the first monthly pass. 20. End of first semester. The discovery of the wit-sharpening potion opened the door for Avada to explore his spiritual power. The first weekend after school started, he spent a morning in the library, finishing all his weekend homework, attended Hufflepuff's picnic on Saturday, then locked himself in the room of requirement. After taking the potion, its effects combined with Avada's own abilities in a chain reaction. The potion let him observe the reconfiguration of his spiritual power structure, while the strengthened spiritual power made him remember every detail with ease. His thinking speed and frequency of inspiration shot up, and his understanding of spiritual power advanced by leaps and bounds. At the same time, his research on the diadem accelerated too. Using the potion, the diadem, and his own spiritual power as test samples, he produced a preliminary talent optimization plan in just 2 weeks and set aside a full day to overhaul his mental system. But when he began a comprehensive analysis, he found something unexpected, a magical structure of unknown purpose hidden deep in his spiritual power. It was unusually solid and integrated into him as if it had been born there, and its presence constantly suppressed his thought processes, effectively reducing his intelligence. In short, his innate talent should have been better, but something had been dulling him since infancy. After long research, Avada identified the structure, the failed name curse. He nearly sent a howler to the Department of Mysteries. This thing had been blunting him for 11 years. Voldemort's strategic mistakes in later life might even have been partly the result of the same curse. Fortunately, thanks to his prior research, he managed to excise it. The moment the curse dissipated, he felt a roar in his mind. His spiritual power surged, and his thinking speed and memory leapt. His classification of talent rose from ordinary person to relatively intelligent ordinary person. Once he implemented the optimization plan successfully, he moved from relatively intelligent ordinary person to a genuine intelligent person. The idea to push even further, to evolve into a genius, had come from the diadem, but by then it was after Halloween. 2 months of near-constant research had passed. He had scarcely rested, and attending classes felt like a break. So when his talent improvement was complete, Avada, physically and mentally exhausted, decided to rest. Apart from self-studying advanced material and occasionally visiting the room of requirement to study predecessors' artifacts, he gave himself no other tasks. Returning to normal school life with his improved abilities, the most visible change was his rapid progress in potions. At the start of the year, Snape had mocked him, saying it was impossible for a first year to master years 1 through 4 in a single year. 2 months later, Avada had fully absorbed the second-year textbook and was more than halfway through the third-year material. He courted Snape's taunts to ask questions, and Snape, while outwardly unchanged, snorting coldly before delivering sarcasm, began giving him more detailed explanations and even some of his own insights. Herbology came along with potions. Once he began practical work in the greenhouses, his magic senses entered the work, and Professor Sprout lauded his progress. What pleased him most was that the professors no longer hesitated over his name. When they called roll or asked him to answer, they now used Mr. Ken, or Ken, without frowning the way they had at first. His classmates took it in stride. If anyone pried, they learned that Dumbledore had instructed Avada to conceal his real name, and curiosity died down. Gradually, even Avada himself almost forgot that his birth name had been Avada Kedavra. Outside class, his relationships with classmates grew warmer. Baron was a constant companion. During the 2 months of intense study, they still spent most of their time together in the library. Cedric and the Weasley twins had made their houses Quidditch teams, and Cedric invited Avada and Cho to watch the final tryouts. To his surprise, Fred and George remembered him and invited him to Gryffindor's tryouts too, saying they liked the title Prankster Magus and had never forgotten his kindness. They tactfully omitted the fact that it had been Baron of Slytherin who suggested the title. Avada accepted and dragged Baron along. Baron saw it as an opportunity to soften Slytherin's image and ease the pointless rivalry between houses, so he agreed. Initially, some Gryffindors were displeased, but they found it hard to be hostile to a first year who had only just arrived. When Baron showed sincere friendliness, whatever resentment remained faded. After Charlie Weasley led Gryffindor to victory in the school match, the small grudge vanished completely. Avada later learned Baron had been given some additional chores by a Slytherin senior over the incident, but Avada didn't much care. Finally, the mental magic project, inspired by the Diadem's linking module, reached completion. The link allowed 2 people to connect their spiritual powers remotely and hear each other's unspoken thoughts directly, strictly on the surface of spiritual power, not through true legitimacy. It required consent from both parties and functioned like an in-team voice chat. Tests showed the link worked between humans only. It did not operate on animals, and its effective range was only a few dozen meters. Avada had not yet tested it on non-human intelligences such as house elves or centaurs. With that work done, the Christmas holidays arrived.